Let the day fade away. Settle into your bed or favorite chair, lower the lights, and let's take a slow journey into the past. If you're enjoying these sleep stories, feel free to give us a like or subscribe, but no pressure at all. Now, let's start our journey. So, you're opening your eyes to the soft glow of dawn in ancient Sparta. But hold up, there's no snooze button here. Just the brutal reality of Spartan life ready to smack you awake faster than a triple shot of espresso. Forget that memory foam mattress, you're on a bed of reeds, because nothing says good morning quite like poking twigs. The Spartans believed soft beds led to soft bodies, and if there's one thing they despised, it was softness. Before you can even think about rubbing the sleep from your eyes, you're thrust into the agoge, Sparta's infamous education system that makes modern schooling look like a cakewalk with extra frosting. This isn't just a learning program, it's a full-on boot camp where recess means running barefoot over sharp stones. Starting at age 7, Spartan boys were handed over to the state to be moulded into warriors. You might think of a schoolyard brawl as a rite of passage. Here, it's a state-sponsored curriculum component. And let's not kid ourselves. This isn't some idyllic, egalitarian society where everyone's just wearing matching tunics and chanting Kumbaya. The Spartan system was designed to churn out warriors, and the agoge was its factory line. In today's world, we might call that child abuse, but back then it was patriotism. The name of the game? Survival of the fittest, literally. You were expected to steal to survive, and if you got caught, punishments were doled out, not for the theft, but for the crime of getting caught. Talk about a twisted lesson in stealth and strategy. Myth-busting time. Forget the Hollywood image of Spartans as simplistic, noble warriors living in austere, minimalist bliss. The reality was as complex as a modern-day reality TV show. Layers upon layers of social hierarchy, political intrigue, and economic maneuvering. Spartans were actually more like the Instagram influencers of their day, curating a very public image of stoic simplicity while the backstage was anything but. Contrary to popular belief, not every Spartan was a full-time warrior. The society was divided into classes, with the Spartiates, or full citizens, at the top. These Spartiates were the ones who went through the agoge, dedicating their lives to military service. Below them were the perioeci, free but non-citizen inhabitants who handled the trade and commerce, the folks who actually kept the economy running. And then there were the helots, essentially serfs tied to the land, who did the heavy lifting so the elite could focus on the important stuff, like training for battle and deciding whether their helmet plume was on point. And let's not forget the women of Sparta. While the agoge was largely a boys' club, Spartan women were no shrinking violets. Unlike their Athenian counterparts, they had more freedom and responsibilities, managing estates and receiving physical training. They were expected to be as tough as the men, and they were. They just did it without the spears and shields. The whole all-warrior narrative is a neat package, but real-life Sparta was more like a tangled ball of yarn. A society built on a foundation of militaristic discipline and social complexity. Spartan life wasn't just about wielding swords and shields, it was a nuanced dance of power, politics, and a fair bit of public relations. So, as dawn breaks over the rugged landscape and you're jolted awake by the cold morning air, remember that Spartan life was less the polished, monochrome simplicity we often imagine, and more of a high-stakes balancing act. It's only morning, but if you think you're ready to take on the rest of the day, you might want to double-check your sandals. You're going to need them. As the cold morning air nips at your heels and you shuffle out of the Spartan dormitory, it's time to face what the Spartans might generously call breakfast. Forget avocado toast or even a humble bowl of cereal. Instead, you'll be feasting on the culinary enigma known as black broth, a dish as famous in Spartan lore as it is feared by modern palates. Picture this: a murky concoction of pig's blood, vinegar, and salt. Bon appetit! Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would anyone willingly consume this culinary nightmare? Well, in the Spartan mindset, this dish was the gastronomic embodiment of their ideals, simple, austere, and capable of sustaining a warrior. It wasn't just a meal, it was a statement. In fact, Spartan soldiers were so fiercely loyal to their black broth that a traveller from Sybaris, a city known for its luxury, once quipped that he finally understood why Spartans were so eager to die. A life of black broth made death seem like a relief. But let's not get stuck on the taste. This nutrient-dense sludge was designed to keep you marching, not munching. It symbolized the Spartan commitment to minimalism, a no-frills approach to life that echoed through every aspect of their society. It might not win any Michelin stars, but it did keep the Spartan war machine running, at least until lunch. Speaking of running, let's sprint into the economic underbelly of Sparta, where things get a bit darker. You see, the Spartan economy wasn't built on gold or trade. It was built on the backs of the helots, the enslaved population who did all the heavy lifting. These helots were the silent engine that powered Spartan society, and without them, the Spartans would have been little more than glorified survivalists. Helots were primarily agricultural workers, tasked with tilling the land and producing the food that kept the Spartan elite in fighting shape. In exchange for their labor, they were allowed to keep a portion of their produce, but make no mistake, this was no benevolent arrangement. Helots outnumbered Spartans by a ratio of about 7,001, a precarious imbalance that made the Spartans live in constant fear of rebellion. To keep this oppressed population in check, the Spartans employed a variety of brutal measures, including the infamous krikteia, a sort of secret police operation that involved young Spartans being sent out to terrorize the helot population, sometimes even assassinating the most rebellious among them. It's a chilling reflection of how the Spartans maintained their warrior utopia by ensuring the helots remained too downtrodden to rise up. So while Hollywood might paint a picture of Spartans as noble savages, the reality was a society deeply reliant on systemic oppression to sustain its way of life. The helots were the unsung heroes, or, more accurately, the unsung victims of Sparta's legendary martial prowess. And let's not forget the perioeci, the free, non-citizen residents who handled the trade and craft work. They were the middlemen, so to speak, keeping the Spartan economy lubricated while the warriors were off doing what they did best, being warriors. Without the perioeci, the Spartans would have been hard-pressed to maintain their military focus, as the perioeci were the ones who manufactured weapons, crafted goods, and facilitated trade with other Greek states. They may not have been Spartans in the strictest sense, but their contribution to the Spartan hegemony was undeniable. So, as you choke down your bowl of black broth and ponder the complex social hierarchy that keeps this warrior society afloat, it becomes clear that Spartan life wasn't just about the glory of battle. It was a delicate ecosystem of power dynamics, dependency, and sheer survival. The myth of the Spartan warrior is seductive, sure, but it's crucial to remember that behind every hero in this tale stood countless others, often bearing the brunt of the burden. As you prepare to tackle the rest of your Spartan day, with its relentless drills and training, take a moment to appreciate the intricate web of human endeavor that made such a society possible. The next time you hear someone extolling the virtues of Spartan simplicity, remember that behind every bowl of black broth lies a story as rich and complex as the broth is, well, not. And as you step out onto the dusty training grounds, sandals securely fastened, understand that surviving a day in Sparta is about more than raw strength. It's about navigating a world where everything, from your diet to your societal role, is a matter of life and death. As you step out onto those dusty training grounds, the sun already blazing down like it's got a personal vendetta against your skin, you realize that midday in Sparta doesn't mean a leisurely break. Nope, it's time for the real business training and discipline, Spartan style. Forget a cozy lunch hour, this is where the legend of the Spartan soldier is forged, whether you're ready or not. Now, let's talk about the phalanx, the Spartan formation that's more legendary than your favorite band's reunion tour. Picture this, a tight-knit square of warriors, shields locked in a wall of bronze, each man guarding the one next to him. It's like a human tank, rolling forward with relentless precision. The phalanx wasn't just about brute strength. It was a masterclass in teamwork and cohesion, a terrifying sight for any enemy who dared to face it. But here's the kicker. It wasn't unique to Sparta. Greek city-states all over the map were doing it. What set the Spartans apart was their reputation for doing it best. You see, the Spartans weren't just soldiers, they were the poster children for military propaganda. Ancient sources like Herodotus loved to wax poetic about Spartan bravery and discipline, painting them as the ultimate warriors. But let's not get too swept away by the romance. Modern historians, armed with skepticism sharper than a Spartan sword, have pointed out that this image was meticulously crafted, part truth, part myth. Sure, the Spartans were fierce, But they also had a knack for marketing themselves as more invincible than they really were. In reality, the phalanx was as much about societal control as it was about military might. Each warrior was expected to conform, to move as one with his comrades. Stray from formation, and you risked not just your life, but the collective shaming of your peers. This pressure to conform was a double-edged sword, ensuring that every Spartan was both a cog in the machine and a prisoner of its demands. It was like being part of an elite club where the initiation was perpetual and the stakes were deadly. And let's not overlook the less glamorous aspects of Spartan military life. The training was brutal, the conditions harsh, and the discipline unwavering. Forget about personal comforts or individual glory. This was about survival and dominance as a unit. The phalanx might look glorious on the battlefield, but behind the scenes it was a grind of endless drills and relentless discipline. You didn't just become a Spartan warrior, you were hammered into one day by day until every inch of you screamed conformity. Then there's the matter of Spartan losses, often glossed over in ancient texts. Sure, they had their moments of glory, like the famous stand at Thermopylae, but they also faced defeats that were conveniently edited out of the heroic narrative. The Battle of Leuctra in 3071 BCE, for instance, was a catastrophic blow, marking the end of Spartan hegemony in Greece. This was Sparta's Achilles' heel, their inflexibility. When the rigid phalanx met an adaptable enemy, the results could be disastrous. But let's give credit where it's due. The Spartans understood the power of myth-making long before Instagram influencers started curating their feeds. They crafted an image of invincibility that has echoed through the ages, a testament to their understanding of the psychology of warfare. By convincing the world, and perhaps themselves, that they were unbeatable, they maintained a psychological edge over their enemies. So as you stand there, sweating under the midday sun, you begin to appreciate the layers of Spartan military might. It's not just about skill with the spear or the strength to heft a shield, it's about the narrative, the mythos that surrounds them. The Spartans weren't just warriors, they were the original spin doctors, weaving a legacy that would endure for millennia. And amidst all this you can't escape the societal pressure to conform. In Sparta, individuality was a liability, the collective good was the ultimate goal. The phalanx was a physical manifestation of that ideal, a united front, unwavering and unyielding. But beneath the polished surface of this martial machine, the reality was a complex weave of discipline, propaganda, and the ever-present threat of failure. Surviving a day in Sparta meant navigating this intricate dance, where every step was choreographed, every move scrutinized. As the sun continues its relentless climb, casting long shadows across the training grounds, you're left to ponder the true nature of Spartan might. It's a tale of discipline and myth-making, a harsh reality cloaked in the allure of legend. And as you prepare to return to the grind of training, it becomes clear that in Sparta, the line between myth and reality is as thin as the edge of a well-honed sword. As the harsh Spartan sun casts its unyielding glare, let's pivot to a group that's often overshadowed by the gleam of manly spears and shields, Spartan women. Now, if you're picturing demure ladies weaving at home like their Athenian counterparts, you're hilariously off the mark. Spartan women were a different breed altogether. More liberated, yes, but also caught in the intricate web of societal expectations. First off, Spartan women enjoyed a level of freedom that would make their Athenian sisters gasp in envy. They could own and inherit property, an unheard-of practice in most of ancient Greece. In fact, by some accounts, they controlled nearly 40% of Spartan land. Talk about a real estate empire before the term even existed. But don't start picturing a utopian society just yet. This freedom wasn't some ancient precursor to the feminist movement, it was a practical arrangement born out of necessity. With Spartan men often away at the battlefield or training for the next big showdown, women stepped up to manage estates and ensure the economic stability of the household. Moreover, Spartan women were expected to be physically fit, participating in sports and exercises to ensure they bore strong children. Forget delicate swoons and parasols, these ladies were more likely to be seen wrestling or throwing a discus. The belief was simple: strong women produce strong warriors. It's a sentiment that might sound progressive, but let's not kid ourselves. Their worth was largely tied to their ability to produce and raise future soldiers. So much for equality. Now, let's tackle the myth of Spartan equality. Sure, Women had more rights compared to their Greek sisters, but they were still very much subject to the demands of a patriarchal society. While they managed the home front, it was all in service of a larger, male-dominated agenda. Their freedom was a byproduct, not a goal. In fact, the focus on producing strong offspring wasn't just a Spartan quirk, it was a societal mandate. Spartan women were judged not by their personal achievements, but by the number and quality of sons they could deliver to the state. And let's not overlook the fact that their liberation came with strings attached, like a suspiciously generous gift card. They were expected to endure the same brutal Spartan ethos that governed male life. Just like their husbands and sons, Spartan women internalized the idea that weakness was a sin. This was a culture that celebrated austerity and toughness, whether you were wielding a spear or a spindle. Sure, they might have had the freedom to speak their minds, and they did, often with a sharpness that could cut through Spartan steel, but that freedom was a means to an end. They were expected to uphold Spartan values, to be the backbone of a society perpetually at war. Their voices, while louder than those of other Greek women, echoed the state's needs. In other words, Spartan women were liberated, but not free, a nuance that gets lost in the romanticized tales of their empowerment. But let's not ignore the allure of the myth. It's tempting to see Spartan women as proto-feminists, flaunting societal norms and living life on their own terms. The truth, though, is more complex, like one of those infuriatingly difficult jigsaw puzzles you start with enthusiasm and abandon with frustration. Spartan women were integral to the machinery of the state, but they were cogs nonetheless, their roles defined by and for the benefit of a militaristic society. Consider the legendary Spartan mother, sending her son off to war with the chilling directive, "Come back with your shield, or on it." This wasn't just a catchy slogan, it was an expectation that reflected the harsh realities of Spartan life. Their lives were dominated by the same military ethos that shaped the men, and their value was inextricably linked to the state's needs. So, as the afternoon shadows stretch across Spartan streets, it's clear that the reality of Spartan women's lives is a tangled mess of rights and restrictions, liberation and limitation. They navigated a world where their roles were as rigid as the training regimens their sons endured. In a society that prized strength above all, Spartan women were both empowered and constrained, a paradox that speaks to the complexity of life in this legendary city-state. As you continue to ponder the intricate dynamics of Spartan society, you'll find that the myth and reality of Spartan women offer a fascinating glimpse into the ancient world. It's a tale of progress wrapped in the iron grip of tradition, a dance of liberation tethered to the needs of a warrior state. And as the sun dips lower, casting a golden hue across the rugged Spartan terrain, you realize that surviving a day in this place is as much about understanding its hidden layers as it is about enduring its overt challenges. The line between freedom and obligation, like so much in Sparta, is sharp yet blurred, a reflection of a society that's as compelling as it is complex. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged Spartan landscape, the day finally begins to wind down. But don't expect a cozy evening by the fireplace, sipping on something warm. This is Sparta, where even relaxation comes with a side of stoic austerity. The concept of a day off was about as foreign to Spartans as a smartphone. Instead, they embraced a lifestyle where every moment, even in repose, was a testament to their unyielding ethos. Evening in Sparta kicks off with a communal meal known as the syssitia. These were more than just dinner parties. They were the social glue holding Spartan society together. Picture a Spartan potluck where everyone contributes, ensuring the communal pot is never empty. You guessed it, more of that infamous black broth, with perhaps a side of barley bread if you're lucky. This wasn't just a simple supper, it was a ritual reinforcing equality among the Spartiates, the full citizens. Everyone, from the highest-ranking general to the freshest recruit, shared the same humble fare, sitting shoulder to shoulder. It was a nightly reminder that in Sparta, individual comforts always played second fiddle to collective strength. But let's not get too carried away with the kumbaya imagery. This wasn't about fraternity so much as it was about conformity. The syssitia were mandatory, and missing one without a good reason could result in fines or even expulsion from your group. Think of it as the original peer pressure, only with more blood pudding and fewer hashtags. In a society where the state was omnipresent, These meals reinforced the notion that no one was above the law or the collective. There was something perversely democratic about it, in a way that only a society built on military discipline could manage. Now, as the plates are cleared and the night deepens, Spartans might engage in some light entertainment songs and poetry that celebrated their martial prowess and legendary heroes. But don't expect a Broadway musical. These performances were more about reinforcing cultural values than entertainment. Think of them as ancient TED Talks with a lot more spears and a lot less technology. Through these stories, they perpetuated the Spartan mythos, the idea that they were the ultimate warriors, blessed by the gods and feared by their enemies. As the night wears on, the city-state quiets down, and you might think it's time to hit the hay. But remember, in Sparta, there's no such thing as total relaxation. Even in sleep, the Spartan ethos of readiness and austerity looms large. The beds are as hard as the day is long, and comfort is a luxury reserved for the weak. If you're hoping for a good night's rest, well, you might want to adjust those expectations. In the Spartan worldview, vigilance is a virtue, and even dreams should be ready for combat. Now let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. The Spartan system, so rigid and unwavering, was ironically its own worst enemy. Sparta's decline was as inevitable as a bad sequel, predictable and disappointing. Their inflexible society, so focused on maintaining the status quo, struggled to adapt to new challenges. The Battle of Leuctra in 3071 BCE was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that no amount of myth-making could shield them from the harsh realities of changing times. The very system that made Sparta a powerhouse also sowed the seeds of its downfall. Their reliance on a rigid social hierarchy and a militaristic lifestyle left little room for innovation or adaptation. While other Greek city-states were embracing new ideas, expanding their economies, and adapting to changes, Sparta clung to its austere traditions. Their economy, heavily dependent on the labour of the helots, was a ticking time bomb. As other societies evolved, Spartan rigidity became a liability rather than an asset. And let's not ignore the demographic time bomb that ticked away beneath their feet. The constant warfare, coupled with a strict citizenship policy, led to a dwindling population that couldn't sustain its military ambitions. By the time Rome rose to power, Sparta was a shadow of its former self, more a museum piece than a living, breathing society. Yet, despite their decline, the allure of their legend endures. The image of the Spartan warrior, standing firm against impossible odds, has captivated imaginations for centuries. It's a testament to the power of myth, the ability to transcend the messy, complex realities of history and distill them into something iconic. But as we've peeled back the layers of the Spartan narrative, it's clear that this romanticized image is just a polished facade over a much more nuanced truth. So, as you drift off, pondering if you could really last a day in ancient Sparta, you're left with this. The seductive simplicity of the Spartan myth belies a reality as intricate and harsh as the land they inhabited. It was a world built on the paradox of strength through austerity, a society that demanded everything and offered little in return. Could you survive a day in Sparta? Maybe. But would you want to? That's a different question entirely. The legacy of the Spartans is a cautionary tale of how the myths we create can both define and destroy us. In the end, the true lesson of Sparta might just be that strength without flexibility is as brittle as the reeds they slept on. Young Heinz Alfred Kissinger, navigating the turbulent waters of 1938 Germany, had no inkling that his name would eventually become synonymous with the art of diplomacy. At a tender age of 15, he and his family made a daring escape from the tightening grip of Nazi tyranny, trading the menacing streets of Firth for the promise of safety across the Atlantic. Fast forward to the bustling chaos of New York City, where the Kissingers settled in the Washington Heights neighborhood, a cultural melting pot teeming with fellow Jewish refugees. It was here that Heinz became Henry, trading his heritage for a new identity in a world that saw him as an outsider. Adjusting to American life wasn't exactly a smooth ride on a luxury liner. Imagine landing in a country where the language sounded like an alien code and the customs were as foreign as moon rocks. Even the simplest tasks like ordering a hot dog required a crash course in survival English. And let's not forget Henry's thick German accent, which proved as stubborn as a mule. It clung to him like a shadow, making his early attempts at communication a comedic trial by fire. As one story goes, a young Henry reportedly asked for directions to the subway, only to be directed to a local sandwich shop. A small miscommunication, perhaps, but it was the first of many cultural hurdles he would face. Henry's academic journey began in earnest when he enrolled at George Washington High School. Here, he was thrown into the deep end of an education system that assumed all students were born knowing the ins and outs of baseball, apple pie, and the Pledge of Allegiance. Yet, despite the odds, and his initial struggles with the English language, Henry excelled. His natural affinity for history and political science quickly became apparent, leading him to Harvard in 1950. The cost of attending Harvard? A whopping $600 a year, a figure that seems laughable today but was a significant sum for an immigrant family in the post-war economy. At Harvard, Henry's intellect blossomed. He dove headfirst into the world of academia, where his thick accent now added a certain gravitas to his arguments rather than detracting from them. But life wasn't all dusty books and ivory towers. Henry was known for his dry wit and the occasional offbeat sense of humour, often playing the part of the eccentric intellectual. One anecdote recalls a particularly lively debate where, after a heated exchange, Henry quipped that his opponent's arguments were like a good cheese full of holes but still enjoyable. Despite his academic prowess, Henry wasn't immune to the social hiccups that come with being the new kid on the block. Harvard was filled with the sons and daughters of America's elite, and fitting into these intellectual circles was akin to trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole. Yet, Kissinger's sheer tenacity and razor-sharp mind gradually won over even the most skeptical of his peers. His senior thesis, a mammoth tome on the diplomacy of Metternich and Castlereagh, was so lengthy that it led Harvard to impose a word limit on future theses, a fact that still amuses the faculty to this day. Kissinger's academic career wasn't devoid of myth either. One popular tale suggests that he was a secretive genius, locked away in his study like some kind of academic hermit. The reality, however, was far from it. Kissinger was a people person, often engaging in lively discussions well into the night and cultivating relationships that would later prove invaluable in his political career. He possessed an uncanny ability to turn any conversation into a strategic debate, making allies out of rivals and confidants out of skeptics. As an immigrant, Kissinger's journey was marked by a constant struggle to balance his past with the demands of his new identity. He was a man caught between two worlds, carrying the weight of his European heritage while navigating the complexities of American society. This duality would later become a hallmark of his diplomatic style, allowing him to bridge gaps and forge connections in ways that others simply couldn't. In his early years, Kissinger's life was a testament to resilience, adaptability, and the occasional dose of humour. It's a story of transformation, where a young boy from Thrace became a man who would one day shape the course of global politics. But that, as they say, is a tale for another time. For now, our focus remains on the young Henry, a brilliant mind with a thick accent and a world of possibilities ahead. And so, from the hallowed halls of Harvard, where he managed to impress even those who were born with silver spoons and a preternatural ease with Latin, Henry Kissinger found himself stepping onto a larger stage. The transition wasn't as smooth as it sounds. Think more of a clumsy pirouette than a graceful glide. After all, the world of American politics isn't exactly known for its warm welcome to outsiders. But Kissinger, with his trademark mix of intellect and charm, had a knack for turning obstacles into stepping stones. Fast forward to January 1969, and there's Kissinger, standing in the Oval Office as National Security Advisor under President Richard Nixon. How did he get there, you ask? Well, let's just say his path was paved with a series of strategic alliances and a reputation for being the go-to guy for complex geopolitical puzzles. Nixon, a man whose paranoia could rival any dystopian novel, saw in Kissinger a kindred spirit, someone who could navigate the murky waters of international diplomacy with the precision of a surgeon and the flair of a seasoned gambler. Kissinger's first major test came in the form of détente with the Soviet Union. Now, détente might sound like a fancy French word for let's be friends, but in reality it was more like a high-stakes game of chess with nuclear weapons as the pawns. The stakes were astronomical, with both superpowers amassing enough nukes to turn the planet into a charred cinder several times over. The goal? to ease Cold War tensions and prevent the world from playing out a real-life version of Strangelove. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was no solo act by Kissinger. The myth of Kissinger as the lone genius orchestrating détente is more fiction than fact. Sure, he was the face of American diplomacy, the man with the plan, but behind the scenes, it was a team effort. The State Department, Pentagon, and CIA were all players in this geopolitical symphony, each with their own agendas and egos. Kissinger was the conductor, but the orchestra was vast and sometimes discordant. The costs of détente were as real as they were staggering. The Strategic Arms Limitation talks, SALT-AW, in 1972, were a landmark achievement, but they came with the price tag of political concessions and the acknowledgement that the Soviet Union was a force to be reckoned with. This was not just about signing a piece of paper and popping the champagne. It was about reshaping global power dynamics, a task that required a delicate balance of diplomacy, coercion, and the occasional threat of annihilation. Then, of course, there was the opening to China, a diplomatic coup that still sends historians into a frenzy of discussion and debate. The year was 1972, and the world was about to witness what could only be described as a geopolitical plot twist worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster. Nixon's visit to China marked a seismic shift in U.S. foreign policy, one that would alter the balance of power in the Cold War and beyond. For decades, China had been the enigmatic dragon in the East, a communist giant shrouded in mystery and suspicion. The U.S. had been content to ignore it, much like an elephant in the room that everyone pretends isn't there. But Kissinger, with his eye for opportunity and nose for strategic advantage, saw potential in thawing relations with Beijing. The result was a secret trip to China in 1971, a move so clandestine it could make a spy novelist blush. This move laid the groundwork for Nixon's historic visit the following year. But let's not get carried away by the myth of Kissinger as the solitary architect of this diplomatic breakthrough. Once again, this was a team effort with input from the likes of Nixon himself, who was just as invested in the narrative of opening China as Kissinger. There were also the unsung heroes, diplomats, advisors, and analysts who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that the whole endeavour didn't come crashing down like a house of cards. The economic realities of opening to China were as complex as they were promising. China, with its massive population and burgeoning economy, was a market that the US business community couldn't resist. The potential for trade and investment was immense, and the allure of accessing 1 billion consumers was too tempting to ignore. But this was not just about economics. It was about shifting the chessboard of global politics, pulling China away from the Soviet orbit and into a more neutral stance. Through all this, Kissinger's reputation as a diplomatic mastermind grew, but so did the myths. The narrative of Kissinger as the solitary genius persisted, partly because it was an appealing story. A single man, armed with intellect and cunning, reshaping the world order. The reality, however, was more nuanced. Kissinger was indeed a master strategist, but one who operated within a complex web of politics, economics, and international relations. As we peel back the layers of this myth, it's important to remember that the story of Kissinger's rise is not just about one man. It's about a confluence of events, personalities, and decisions that shaped a pivotal era in world history. The legend of Kissinger is seductive, but the truth is far more intricate and, dare I say, more interesting. So, let's keep our eyes on the bigger picture as we continue this journey through the diplomatic labyrinth that is the life of Henry Kissinger. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. All right, so we've been dancing through Kissinger's diplomatic triumphs like a political cha-cha. But now it's time to switch gears and dive into the deep end of complexity and controversy, the Vietnam War. Here, Kissinger's strategic genius takes on a darker hue, wrapped in the fog of war and moral ambiguity. Let's peel back the layers on a period that's as controversial as a reality TV show, with much higher stakes. By 1969, the Vietnam War was like that stubborn stain on your favorite shirt. No matter how hard you tried, it just wouldn't come out. The war had been raging for over a decade, with American involvement escalating faster than a caffeine-fueled auctioneer. Enter Kissinger, who was tasked with pulling off the diplomatic equivalent of landing a plane with no landing gear, orchestrating peace while the bombs kept dropping. Let's start with the peace talks in Paris. Picture this. A grand setting fit for a diplomatic ballet, but instead of graceful pirouettes, you've got delegates tripping over political landmines. The talks were a marathon of negotiation gymnastics, stretching from 1968 to 1973, with Kissinger often at the helm. But these weren't your typical peace talks. Oh no, they were more like a geopolitical soap opera, complete with secret meetings, false promises, and enough tension to make a soap bubble burst. It's tempting to imagine Kissinger as the master puppeteer, pulling strings with a flick of his wrist. The reality? It was more like herding cats. Cats with nuclear weapons, mind you. The North Vietnamese were as unyielding as a brick wall, and the South Vietnamese were just as stubborn. Kissinger's challenge was to craft a ceasefire that neither side wanted to sign, but everyone desperately needed. It was like trying to sell a car with no wheels. A tough sell indeed. The 1973 Paris Peace. Accords finally brought a semblance of peace, but calling it a success is like calling a sinking ship an opportunity for a swim. Sure, the Accords ended direct US military involvement, but the fighting in Vietnam continued, claiming lives and sparking debates over whether Kissinger had brokered peace or merely delayed inevitable chaos. The Accords were a band-aid on a bullet wound, temporary and insufficient. Now, let's shift our gaze to Cambodia. If Vietnam was the main stage, then Cambodia was the shadowy backstage area where the real drama unfolded. In 1969, Nixon and Kissinger approved Operation Menu, a series of secret bombings in Cambodia aimed at disrupting North Vietnamese supply lines. These bombings were about as secret as a celebrity scandal. Eventually, everyone found out. More than 2,750,000 tons of bombs were dropped, an amount that boggles the mind and devastates the land. The bombings sparked outrage and moral debate. Critics accused Kissinger of reckless endangerment, while supporters argued it was a necessary evil to protect American troops. It's the kind of moral quandary that makes philosophy students salivate or tear their hair out. Was it justified to risk one nation's sovereignty to potentially save another? The jury's still out, and probably will be until the end of time. The bombings also raise the question, how do we measure success in war? Is it body counts, territory gained, or the elusive peace with honor that Nixon and Kissinger touted? The reality is murkier than a swamp in monsoon season. The bombings in Cambodia didn't just target enemy bases. They destabilized a nation, contributing to the rise of the Khmer Rouge, who would later inflict horrors of their own. It's a classic example of the law of unintended consequences, where attempts to solve one problem create a whole new set of issues. And then there's the moral debate that swirls around Kissinger like a persistent fog. To some, he's a Machiavellian strategist, wielding Realpolitik like a master craftsman. To others, he's the embodiment of cold pragmatism, prioritizing geopolitical chess moves over human lives. Debates rage on whether his actions were those of a necessary evil or simply evil. It's the kind of question that could fuel countless late-night debates, and it does. History has a way of sanitizing complexity for simplicity's sake, turning the chaotic and convoluted into something that fits neatly into textbooks. But let's not kid ourselves. The Vietnam War, with all its tangled alliances and moral dilemmas, defies easy categorization. It's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. You can try, but it's never a perfect fit. The allure of Kissinger's story lies in its contradictions, in the tension between his public persona and the shadows cast by his decisions. Was he a master of peace or a harbinger of destruction? The truth, as always, is somewhere in between, nestled in the messy realities of war and diplomacy. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the labyrinth of Kissinger's legacy, let's remember that history is not a straight line. It's a tangled web, woven with threads of ambition, morality, and the ever-elusive search for peace. Stay tuned, because the story of Henry Kissinger is far from over. Now that we've navigated the murky waters of Vietnam, it's time to swap those jungles for the sweltering sands of the Middle East, a region where Kissinger's diplomatic dexterity would be tested like never before. Picture the early 1970s, a geopolitical chessboard where every move had the potential to trigger a domino effect of chaos, or, if played right, a semblance of stability. Enter the Yom Kippur War of 1973, a conflict that turned the Middle East into a powder keg and catapulted Kissinger into the spotlight once again. The Yom Kippur War erupted on October 6, 1973, with Egyptian and Syrian forces launching a surprise attack on Israel during the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. The conflict was quick and brutal, lasting just 19 days, but it left a scar on the region that would shape diplomatic relations for years. For Kissinger, this was the ultimate test of his diplomatic prowess, a chance to prove that he could not only broker peace, but also navigate the treacherous waters of Middle Eastern politics. Kissinger's approach was anything but conventional. Instead of sticking to the usual playbook of formal negotiations, he embarked on a whirlwind tour of shuttle diplomacy, hopping between capitals like a jet-setting diplomat with a penchant for last-minute deals. Over a span of 8 months, he logged over 24,000 miles in the air, a testament to his relentless dedication and possibly his frequent flyer miles. His strategy was simple yet audacious: keep the parties talking long enough to prevent another outbreak of violence. But let's not romanticize this as a one-man show of diplomatic heroics. Sure, Kissinger was the face of American diplomacy, the man shaking hands and flashing that enigmatic smile. But behind the scenes, it was a complex dance of power dynamics, regional alliances, and a fair bit of arm twisting. He leveraged America's influence to coax, cajole, and, when necessary, coerce the warring parties into a ceasefire. This wasn't just about stopping the fighting. It was about reshaping the power balance in the Middle East, a region as unpredictable as a soap opera plot twist. The economic stakes were sky high. The war triggered the 1973 oil crisis, as Arab oil producers imposed an embargo on countries supporting Israel, causing oil prices to quadruple, in just a few months. The cost? A staggering $12 per barrel, up from just $3 before the embargo, sending shockwaves through economies worldwide. For the US, it was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the geopolitical weight of oil and the vulnerability of global supply chains. Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy was as much about containing the conflict as it was about addressing these economic tremors. He knew the stakes went beyond territorial disputes. They struck at the heart of American energy security and economic stability. It was a high-wire act, balancing the need for immediate peace with the long-term goal of securing energy supplies, a challenge that would have left lesser diplomats quaking in their polished loafers. In the midst of these high-stakes negotiations, Kissinger's interactions with world leaders revealed the charm and wit that became his trademark. There are tales of him using humor as a diplomatic tool, diffusing tension with a well-timed joke, or a wry observation. In one memorable exchange with Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, he reportedly quipped about his own Jewish heritage, easing the sometimes fraught discussions with a personal touch. It was diplomacy, with a dash of levity, a reminder that even in the gravest of situations, a little humor goes a long way. But let's not kid ourselves, this was no fairy tale. The peace that Kissinger brokered was fragile, more like a ceasefire with benefits than a lasting solution. The agreements he helped negotiate, including the disengagement agreements between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Syria, were steps toward peace, but the path remained fraught with obstacles. The myth of Kissinger as the sole architect of Middle Eastern peace is tempting, but it oversimplifies a narrative rich with complexity and contradiction. The Yom Kippur War and its aftermath underscored the harsh realities of Middle Eastern politics, where alliances shifted like desert sands and promises were often as fleeting as mirages. Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy was a masterclass in adaptability, showing that sometimes diplomacy requires improvisation and a willingness to play the long game. The legend of Kissinger the peacemaker is alluring, but the reality is a story of calculated risks, moral ambiguity, and the ever-present spectre of conflict. As we peel back the layers of Kissinger's influence in the Middle East, it's crucial to remember the context, the economic pressures, the geopolitical stakes, and the human cost of war. It's a tale of diplomacy that defies easy categorization, much like the man himself. So, as we delve deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of Kissinger's legacy, let's keep our eyes wide open and our minds sharp, because the story is far from over. Stay tuned, because the sands of history are still shifting, and there's much more to uncover in the saga of Henry Kissinger. Ah, the sands of history, ever shifting, never static, much like the legacy of Henry Kissinger. The man, the myth, the maestro of diplomacy, As we wrap up this whirlwind tour through his life and times, it's worth pausing to consider the legacy he left behind. Kissinger's post-government career was akin to a rock star's farewell tour, minus the screaming fans, but with plenty of global intrigue. After leaving government service in 1977, he didn't exactly retreat to a quiet life of knitting and crossword puzzles. No, Kissinger became a globe-trotting consultant, advising on matters of state and business with the same fervour he'd once applied to Cold War chess games. His consulting firm, Kissinger Associates, became a beacon for those seeking his sage advice, or, let's be honest, his Rolodex, with clients ranging from multinational corporations to governments seeking a little geopolitical edge. Kissinger remained an influential figure behind the scenes. His ability to navigate complex political landscapes wasn't just a relic of the past, it was his stock in trade. The irony, of course, is that the man who once wielded power at the highest echelons now operated from the shadows, a puppet master minus the strings. Yet, even in this new chapter, the myths persisted. Kissinger the brilliant tactician, Kissinger the master strategist. But the truth, as always, is more nuanced. His advice was not infallible, nor his predictions always accurate. When it came to forecasting political shifts, he was about as reliable as a weather forecast in monsoon season. But let's not kid ourselves. His insights were still highly sought after, even if they came with a side of unpredictability. Public perception of Kissinger has been a roller coaster ride of admiration and disdain. To some, he's a hero, a man who brought a semblance of order to a chaotic world. To others, he's a villain whose Realpolitik often came at a human cost. The dichotomy between Kissinger the peacemaker and Kissinger the pragmatist is as stark as it is unresolved. Critics have long questioned the morality of his decisions, while supporters laud his ability to make tough choices in an unforgiving world. The ironies of history's judgment are not lost on Kissinger's legacy. In a world where leaders are often glorified or vilified in black and white terms, Kissinger remains a study in shades of grey. His achievements, like the opening to China or the détente with the Soviet Union, are undeniable. Yet, they are counterbalanced by controversies like the Cambodian bombings and the prolonged agony of Vietnam. It's a legacy that defies easy categorization, much like the man himself. What lessons, then, can we glean from Kissinger's life? First, the art of diplomacy is as much about the dance as the destination. Kissinger's career demonstrates that diplomacy often requires improvisation, adaptability, and a certain flair for the dramatic. Whether it was his shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East or his back-channel negotiations with the Soviets, Kissinger understood that the path to peace is rarely a straight line. It's more like a winding road, full of unexpected turns and occasional dead ends. Second, power is a fickle friend. Kissinger learned early on that wielding influence requires a delicate balance of force and finesse. His tenure as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State was marked by high-stakes negotiations and complex power dynamics. Yet, the allure of power often comes with a hefty price tag, measured in both personal and political costs. Finally, global politics is a comedy of errors, a stage where the best-laid plans can be upended by the most unforeseen of events. Kissinger's career is a testament to the unpredictability of international relations, a realm where today's ally could be tomorrow's adversary and where the only constant is change itself. It's a world where irony reigns supreme, and where the line between victory and defeat is often blurred. As we conclude this exploration of Kissinger's enduring influence, it's clear that his legacy is as complex as the man himself, a tapestry woven with threads of triumph and tragedy, brilliance and blunder. The myths surrounding Kissinger may never fully dissipate, but perhaps that's fitting. After all, history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. And in the story of Henry Kissinger, the legend and the reality are forever intertwined, dancing together like partners in a diplomatic waltz. So here's to Kissinger, a man who shaped history while remaining, in many ways, an enigma. A reminder that the art of diplomacy is as elusive as it is essential. You're waking up in a 6th century BC Thracian village, and the first thing you notice is that the concept of hitting snooze is a few thousand years in the future. The dawn light filters through the thatched roof of your home, a cosy, if slightly smoky, affair made of wattle and daub. Family life here is less about Instagram-worthy breakfast spreads and more about survival. Your parents, siblings, and possibly a few extended relatives all share this space with you, and privacy is as scarce as a Thracian warrior without a moustache. Thracians have a bit of a reputation for being fierce warriors. But before you grab your weapons and start thinking you're the next Achilles, let's get some context straight. Your family operates within a tightly knit community where social structures are as rigid as the bronze sword hanging by the door. At the top of the social ladder are the kings and nobles, and no, you're not one of them. You're a commoner, which means your day is going to involve a lot of hard work with little glamour. Economically, your village runs on a barter system. Coins? Not a thing here. Instead, you trade goods and services like a living, breathing marketplace. Cattle are the gold standard of wealth. Got a cow? You're doing all right. No cow? Well, you're hoping for a good harvest, or that your neighbour needs help with his oxen. The value of cattle isn't just in the milk or meat, they're walking status symbols, the ancient version of a luxury sports car. A single cow could be worth several sheep, and let's not even get started on the value of a horse. Now, as you stretch and shake off the night, consider the comforts of modern life that you don't have. No running water means a trip to the local stream or well is in order. Forget the bathroom as you know it. Your morning routine involves a chamber pot and a brisk walk outside. Hygiene standards are basic, but hey, everyone smells the same, so there's a certain egalitarianism in the air, or perhaps it's just the scent of communal living. Breakfast isn't a leisurely affair with avocado toast or cappuccinos. Instead, you're looking at a simple meal rooted in grains. Think porridge, maybe some bread if you're lucky, and whatever seasonal fruits or vegetables are on hand. Meat is a luxury, not a staple, so that juicy steak you're craving? Save that dream for a post-battle feast. If you're lucky, you might have some cheese made from goat or sheep milk, but don't expect it to be aged Gouda. Let's talk social dynamics. Thracians have a reputation for being fiercely independent and slightly rebellious, but there's a lot more to it. Your community is bound by kinship and loyalty, but it's also a place where alliances are crucial. Neighboring tribes might be allies today and rivals tomorrow, so knowing who's who is as important as knowing which end of the spear to hold. There's a romantic myth that Thracians lived a life of constant warfare and revelry, but let's debunk that. Yes, warriors are revered, and battle is a significant part of life, but most of your time is spent on agriculture and tending to livestock. When you're not training with weapons or dreaming of glory, you're planting barley or herding sheep. It's a grind, but it's essential for survival. The diet of a Thracian warrior is pragmatic, not extravagant. Think barley, wheat and rye as the backbone of your meals. You might have some honey to sweeten things up, but it's not exactly poured over everything like a gourmet drizzle. Fish from nearby rivers and streams can make an appearance, but you're not indulging in seafood platters. Wine is the drink of choice, often diluted with water, because getting drunk off your rocker isn't conducive to defending your village or negotiating with neighbours. Family life is central, and roles are well defined. Men are expected to defend the tribe and work the fields, while women manage the household and contribute to agricultural duties. It's a partnership out of necessity, not ideology. Gender roles are clear, but everyone has a part to play in this ancient sitcom of survival. As you prepare to step into your day, remember that the world of a Thracian warrior is as much about community and cooperation as it is about individual bravery. Your life is woven into a complex tapestry of alliances, rivalries, and shared responsibilities. The dawn of another day in Thrace isn't just about sharpening swords, it's about ensuring your family and village thrive, one barter at a time. Welcome to the reality behind the legend, where every sunrise brings both challenges and the chance to prove your mettle. Now, let's dive into the thrilling world of Thracian warfare, where the mythic image of a gallant warrior in shining armor meets the gritty reality of ancient combat. First things first, gear up, because your bronze sword isn't just a shiny accessory, it's a serious investment. A single sword could cost the equivalent of several sheep, or in some cases, even a small herd. Picture this as the antique equivalent of buying a high-end laptop necessary, but a big deal for your wallet. Speaking of wallets, let's talk about the weight of your gear. The average Thracian warrior isn't strutting around in full-body armor like a medieval knight. Nope, you're more likely to be sporting a lighter ensemble. Think a combination of leather and bronze, a cuirass for the chest, maybe a helmet if you can afford it, and some greaves to protect those shins. Total weight? You're looking at around 20 to 30 pounds, which doesn't sound like much until you remember you're not just posing for Instagram, you're running, fighting, and trying not to get skewered. Now, before you start feeling like an underdressed extra in a historical epic, remember that this lighter gear is a strategic choice. Mobility is key. Thracians are known for their guerrilla-style tactics, and you can't exactly ambush the enemy like a shadowy ninja if you're clanking around like a walking tin can. This isn't Sparta, it's Thrace, where stealth and speed are your best allies. Training is a blend of physical and mental preparation, because swinging a sword around isn't as intuitive as it looks on TV. You're spending hours practicing with wooden weapons, developing the muscle memory and reflexes necessary to survive when the stakes are high. And forget about choreographed movie fights, real combat is chaotic and brutal. Your trainers are likely veterans themselves, and they're not sugarcoating anything. They're preparing you for the harsh reality that glory is usually found on the other side of a lot of hard work and, unfortunately, a fair bit of bloodshed. As for battle strategies, the Thracians take a page or two from their Greek and Persian neighbours because, let's face it, innovation often comes from borrowing a good idea. While the Greeks are busy perfecting the phalanx, a human tank formation made up of rows of shield-bearing soldiers, Thracians are more inclined to exploit terrain and hit-and-run tactics. The idea is to use your knowledge of the local landscape to outmaneuver your foes, striking when they least expect it and then disappearing back into the woods like ancient commandos. But let's not get too starry-eyed about this rugged lifestyle. The glamour of battle is often overshadowed by its grim realities. Injuries are common, and medical care? Well, let's just say it's more rub some herbs on it than get a tetanus shot. Infection is a constant threat, and a minor wound can turn into a major problem faster than you can say antibiotics. We can't overlook the influence of the mighty horse either. In Thracian culture, horses are not just transportation. They're a form of currency, a status symbol, and a tactical advantage all rolled into one. If you've got a horse, you're not just a warrior, you're a cavalryman, a game-changer on the battlefield. But owning a horse is like having a sports car that eats a lot of hay and requires constant maintenance. It's a privilege and a responsibility, and it comes with its own set of challenges. The romanticized image of the Thracian warrior as a lone wolf is far from the truth. In reality, it's teamwork that wins the day. You're part of a unit trained to move and fight as one. The bonds formed in training and battle are deep, because trust is essential when your life literally depends on the guy next to you holding the line. And while Thracians are often portrayed as wild and unruly, that's a bit of an oversimplification. Sure, they're fiercely independent and have a reputation for being a bit rebellious, but there's a method to the madness. The Thracian way of war isn't about chaos, it's about controlled chaos. It's about using unpredictability as a weapon, catching the enemy off guard with tactics they never saw coming. So there you have it. The life of a Thracian warrior is a far cry from the romanticized depictions of constant glory and grandeur. It's about hard training, strategic thinking, and a fair amount of grit. Behind every warrior's legend is a reality that's as harsh as it is fascinating. And just like that, your day in Thrace is only beginning. The sun is rising, and whether you're ready or not, the world of ancient warfare awaits. And just like that, you're thrust into the political quagmire of Thrace, where the landscape of tribal politics is as rocky as the terrain itself. The Thracians, an eclectic mix of tribes, are a lesson in decentralization, long before hipster startup culture made it cool. Picture a region where every valley and hilltop might shelter a tribe with its own chieftain, each convinced that they're the main character in the epic saga of Thrace. But before you lace up your sandals to rally under a chieftain's banner, let's paint the political canvas. Thrace isn't a unified kingdom with a single ruler lounging on a golden throne. No, sir. It's more like a patchwork quilt made by someone with a short attention span, fragmented, colourful, and prone to unravelling at the seams. You might have a dozen tribes within 100-mile radius, each led by a chieftain whose authority is as much about charisma and cattle as it is about bloodlines. So, what's a Thracian chieftain's role in your life as a warrior? Well, he's the guy who decides when it's time to grab your sword and head out to either defend the tribe or go on the offensive. These chieftains are the power players, the ones making the hard calls. They're the Steve Jobs of the ancient world, minus the turtlenecks and tech conventions. Their power isn't absolute, though. It's more like herding cats with a side of diplomacy. A savvy chieftain knows his reputation is only as good as his last successful raid or the size of his herds. Now, let's navigate the thorny relationships with those pesky Greek city-states. If you think your neighbour's incessant lawn mowing is annoying, imagine living next to a bunch of Greeks who are as politically savvy as they are philosophically inclined. Thrace and Greece have a relationship that's both symbiotic and antagonistic. On one hand, the Thracians trade with Greek merchants, swapping local resources like gold, silver, and timber for Greek pottery and wine. On the other hand, the Greeks often view the Thracians as the rugged, untamed cousins from the north, a little too fond of fighting and drinking for the Greeks' taste. But it's not all tension and territorial disputes. Thracian warriors are sometimes employed as mercenaries by Greek city-states, a testament to their martial prowess and the Greeks' pragmatic approach to warfare. If you're a Thracian warrior lucky enough to be hired by, say, Athens, you're not just earning a paycheck, you're gaining exposure to new tactics and technologies. It's like a cross-cultural exchange program, except instead of trading recipes, you're learning how to flank an enemy phalanx. Economically, these alliances and conflicts aren't just about who gets to claim the best grazing land. They're about who controls the trade routes and the resources. The Aegean coast is rich in minerals and timber, and both Greeks and Thracians have their eyes on the prize. The economic motivations behind these skirmishes are as old as the hills. Control the resources, and you control the wealth. Forget the noble barbarian image. This is cold, calculated economics at play. Speaking of myths, let's debunk the noble barbarian trope. Sure, the Greeks liked to romanticize Thracians as wild and free, but let's be real. Life as a Thracian warrior isn't a poetic ramble through the forest, it's a grind. You're constantly navigating the politics of your tribe, the demands of your chieftain, and the ever-present threat of betrayal or invasion. The noble savage idea is more about Greek storytelling than Thracian reality, a way for the Greeks to frame their neighbours as both fascinating and fearsome. Now, let's turn to governance and law. In a world where written language isn't the go-to for legislation, oral tradition is the glue holding society together. Laws are passed down verbally, and justice is served in gatherings where disputes are settled through debate and consensus. It's democracy in its rawest form, where the power of rhetoric and reputation often outweighs the facts. If you're good with words, you might find yourself as a kind of proto-lawyer, swaying public opinion in the chieftain's court. Just remember, there's no paper trail, so your sharp tongue is your best ally. Oral tradition isn't just for law and governance, it's the bedrock of Thracian culture. Stories, songs, and histories are passed down through generations, each retelling a chance to tweak the narrative. It's like a game of telephone, where every storyteller adds their own flair. These tales are more than entertainment. They're the social fabric that binds the tribe, offering lessons in morality, leadership, and the consequences of hubris. As you stand in the centre of this whirlwind of politics, alliances, and oral traditions, it's clear that life as a Thracian warrior is as much about navigating the human landscape as it is about wielding a sword. The myths and realities of 6th century BC. Thrace aren't just tales of valour and conquest, they're intricate tapestries of human ambition, survival, and the relentless march of history. So, as you prepare to face whatever challenges the day holds, remember that you're not just a cog in the machine, you're part of a complex, ever-evolving story that's as thrilling and unpredictable as any epic. So, as you navigate this complex tapestry of politics, alliances, and oral traditions, you're also diving headfirst into the interpersonal dynamics of your Thracian village, where life is as much about religious fervour and community bonds as it is about wielding a sword. Beyond the clamour of battle and the whispers of political intrigue, there's a quieter, yet equally profound, world of ritual and belief that shapes the day-to-day existence of a Thracian warrior. Let's start with the goddess Bendis, a deity who's as much a part of your daily life as the sun rising over the hills. Bendis isn't just any goddess, she's the celestial embodiment of the moon, hunting, and the wilds. a sort of ancient multitasker, if you will. Her worship involves nocturnal rites, and if you're imagining a moonlit gathering that's one part solemn ceremony, one part social event, you're on the right track. These rituals are a blend of dance, music, and offerings, designed to curry favor with the goddess and ensure her protection over the community. Forget your local yoga class, these gatherings are the ultimate in spiritual and communal exercise. Now, as a warrior, your role in these ceremonies is more than just a passive observer. You're expected to participate actively, perhaps even lead a dance or make a sacrifice. In this world, the lines between warrior and priest blur, because in Thrace, spirituality and warfare are two sides of the same coin. It's about balance, not unlike trying to keep peace in a family dinner conversation when politics come up. One wrong move, and things can quickly go south. Speaking of balance, let's dive into the Thracian perspective on the afterlife, which is as richly nuanced as a plot twist in your favorite binge-worthy series. For the Thracians, death isn't a period at the end of the sentence. It's more like a semicolon, signifying a continuation into another realm. They believe in a vibrant afterlife, where warriors are greeted by their ancestors and continue their existence in a paradise of eternal feasting and merriment. Think Valhalla, but with more wine and less Viking metal. But let's not romanticize this too much. The preparation for such an afterlife involves elaborate burial rites, and these aren't just a one-man show. The entire community gets involved, because in Thrace, your send-off is a reflection of both your status and your tribe's esteem. The funerary feasts are about celebrating a life and ensuring safe passage into the next world. And yes, that means there's some serious pressure to throw the ancient equivalent of a posthumous rager. It's a bit like planning a wedding, but with more animal sacrifices and fewer arguments over seating arrangements. Moving from the celestial to the communal, let's talk about the social expectations for warriors off duty. No lounging around in your chiton, sipping diluted wine all day, there's work to be done. Community feasts are a big deal, and they're not just about stuffing yourself with barley bread and goat cheese. These gatherings are where alliances are forged, disputes are settled, and, importantly, where you demonstrate your worth outside the battlefield. Think of them as the original networking events, minus the awkward small talk and business cards. You're not just there to eat and drink, you're expected to contribute. Maybe you're bringing a freshly hunted boar to the table or showcasing your skill with a lyre. That's right, warriors are also musicians. Thracians have a rich tradition of music and poetry, and the ability to entertain is as prized as the ability to fight. It's a reminder that even in a society often mischaracterized as purely warlike, there's a deep appreciation for the arts. This challenges the myth of the Thracian as a mere brute, revealing a culture that values creativity alongside combat prowess. And this brings us to the Thracian contributions to art and culture. Sure, you might not be chiseling statues like the Greeks or crafting intricate mosaics in your downtime, but Thracian art is vibrant and expressive in its own right. The pottery, for example, is boldly decorated, often with motifs that tell stories of gods, heroes, and the natural world. It's functional, yes, but it's also a canvas for storytelling, a way to keep history alive in clay form. And as for music, the Thracians are credited with developing unique instruments such as the kithara, which adds a distinct flair to their cultural tapestry. So, as you navigate your off-duty life, remember that being a Thracian warrior is about more than just swinging a sword. It's about embodying the spirit of your people in every aspect of life, from the battlefield to the banquet hall. You're part of a culture that values strength and strategy, yes, but also community, creativity, and a deep connection to the divine. It's a complex, multifaceted existence, and one that defies the simplistic stereotypes often pinned on ancient Thracian society. As the sun sets over the rolling hills and the first stars pierce the night sky, you prepare to join your tribe in another evening of ritual and revelry. There's a rhythm to life in Thrace that's as intoxicating as the wine you drink, a dance between duty and desire that ensures your story is part of a larger, enduring narrative. And just like that, the day isn't ending. It's merely transitioning into another chapter, where the myths continue to meet reality and history unfolds in the flickering light of the fire. As the night deepens, the firelight flickers on the faces of your fellow Thracians, casting a glow that seems to bridge the chasm between ancient ritual and modern fascination. Here you are, part of a lineage that has sparked imaginations from Herodotus to Hollywood, a lineage that invites both admiration and misinterpretation in equal measure. Let's talk legacy, shall we? What is it about the Thracian warrior that has made him such an enduring figure in the tapestry of history? First, let's tackle the romanticized image of the Thracian warrior as some sort of ancient action hero. Ancient texts, like those of Herodotus, painted Thracians as fierce, untamed fighters, a sort of wild card in the Greek-centric world narrative. But these accounts often came from outsiders, who viewed Thracians through a lens of exoticism and a touch of fear. The Greeks, for instance, saw them as their northern, mysterious and slightly troublesome neighbours, a people more likely to raid a border town than to engage in polite discourse over olives and feta. Flash forward a couple of millennia, and modern media has run with this notion. Think of films and series that portray Thracians as a cross between Conan the Barbarian and a member of a biker gang, untamed, fierce, and ever ready for a skirmish. It's compelling, sure, but it's also a bit of a Hollywood gloss over a more nuanced reality. The truth? Life as a Thracian warrior was as much about patience, strategy, and community as it was about raw courage and combat. It's a life where the grind of daily survival often outweighed the glamour of the battlefield. Now, what do primary sources really say about these warriors? Well, let's dig into the archaeological finds. Grave sites and burial mounds across Thrace reveal a people who valued their warriors not just in life, but in death. Weapons and armour found in these sites, bronze swords, iron helmets, and leather cuirasses, tell us about the material culture of these warriors. These were not just tools of war, they were symbols of status and identity. A bronze sword might cost the equivalent of a small herd of cattle, making it both a prized possession and a mark of one's place in the social hierarchy. And then there are the depictions in Thracian artifacts, pottery, carvings and metalwork, where warriors are often shown not in the throes of battle, but in moments of reflection or ritual. It's a reminder that while combat was a part of life, it wasn't the whole story. These images suggest a society that respected its fighters not just for their martial prowess, but for their roles as leaders, negotiators and community members. In a world where allegiances could shift as quickly as the wind, the ability to think strategically was as vital as the ability to wield a weapon. So, how did these ancient realities morph into the myths we're left with today? Well, humans have always been suckers for a good story. The image of the noble savage, the untamed warrior, taps into something primal in us, a longing for a time when life was straightforward, when courage and brawn were the ultimate currencies. It's a narrative that simplifies a complex reality into something digestible, something that resonates with our need for heroes and legends. But let's not forget the economic and political realities that shaped the Thracian experience. Thrace was a land of resources, gold, silver, and timber, which made it both a prize and a target. The Thracian warrior, therefore, wasn't just fighting for glory, he was defending the economic backbone of his society. Control the resources, control the narrative. That's a tale as old as time and as relevant today as it was back then. And what do these insights tell us about the enduring allure of warriors in general? It's simple. Warriors represent the intersection of human desires for strength, honor, and identity. They are avatars of our collective aspirations and fears, embodying the tension between civilization and chaos. The Thracian warrior, with his dual role as protector and participant in the social fabric, encapsulates this perfectly. He's not just a relic of the past, he's a mirror reflecting the timeless dance between myth and reality. As the embers of the fire fade and the first light of dawn begins to paint the sky, you realize that the legacy of the Thracian warrior is not just about battles fought or won. It's about the stories told, the myths woven, and the truths uncovered. In a world constantly changing, the essence of the warrior's journey remains, a testament to human resilience, adaptability, and the relentless pursuit of meaning. So, as you step back into the rhythms of your own life, carry with you the knowledge that every warrior's legend is an invitation to look beyond the myth and into the heart of what it means to be truly alive. Before Google Maps, Garmin, or even a rusty old compass, there were the Polynesian Navigators, the original daredevils of the deep blue. These folks weren't just content to sit on their islands sipping coconut water. They were driven by a thirst for exploration that would make Columbus look like a homebody. Starting around 1500 BC, these intrepid sailors managed to crisscross the Pacific Ocean, a staggering 10,000-mile expanse, as if it were their own backyard. And unlike your average Sunday driver, they did it all without a single road sign or GPS voice telling them to turn left. So how did they pull off this maritime magic trick? Well, they didn't just wing it, that's for sure. The ancient Polynesians were the human equivalent of a Swiss army knife on water. They had a toolkit of natural phenomena that would make any modern navigator green with envy. For starters, they read the stars like an astronomer hot on the trail of a comet. Forget the Big Dipper. They used whole constellations to plot courses between islands, comparing the angles of the stars to their positions on the waves. It was a celestial navigation system that was both complex and beautifully simple. But it wasn't just the stars they looked to for guidance. The ocean swells, those rolling beasts of the sea, were their highway signs. By examining the direction, size, and frequency of the waves, these seafarers could determine their path. This was no small feat. It was like deciphering a message in a bottle that had been tossed around for centuries. Add to that their use of birds, particularly the kind that didn't stray far from land, and you've got a navigation system more reliable than an iPhone in the middle of the Pacific. Now, let's talk about the vessels that carried these seafaring superstars. The double-hulled canoes they constructed were engineering marvels of their time. These weren't your average paddle boats. They were more akin to floating cathedrals of craftsmanship. Built from sturdy woods like koa and lashed together with coconut fiber ropes, these canoes could withstand the whims of the mighty Pacific. And they had to, considering the voyages sometimes spanned over 2,000 miles between islands like Tahiti and Hawaii, with not a single pit stop in between. Talk about a test of endurance. Yet, these voyages weren't just the whims of wandering adventurers. They were carefully orchestrated missions, and behind each one was a social structure as intricate as a Swiss watch. Chiefs, the maritime CEOs of their day, orchestrated the logistics. Imagine them in their island boardrooms, deciding which crew would embark on the next big adventure and which island would become the next trade partner or ally. It was all about expanding influence, securing resources, and sometimes just proving who was top dog in the Polynesian pack. Let's not forget the crew members themselves, the unsung heroes of these epic voyages. These navigators were not just ordinary sailors. They were trained from a young age, apprenticed through years of rigorous learning under master navigators. We're talking about an education that makes your average master's degree look like a weekend workshop. They learned to read the ocean like a book, understanding its moods and mysteries, and how to harness the wind to their advantage. These navigators were revered, often holding a status equal to or greater than that of a warrior. In societies where the sea was both a life-giver and a life-taker, knowing how to read its signs was a skill as valuable as gold. Of course, the romantic notion of the noble navigator etched against a sunset sea is a bit of a Disney-fied version of events. These voyages were grueling, fraught with peril, and not everyone made it back to tell the tale. Imagine being adrift on a vast ocean, with nothing but the horizon in sight, for weeks on end. Supplies could run dangerously low, storms could strike without warning, and those birds that were supposed to lead you to land? They could take a day off whenever they felt like it. The ocean was a fickle mistress, demanding respect and punishing those who dared underestimate her. And while it's tempting to romanticize these explorers as serene sages of the sea, let's not forget that they were also human. They had ambitions, rivalries, and yes, even egos. Navigating the ocean was as much about political maneuvering as it was about skill. Chiefs used these voyages to assert dominance, forge alliances, and sometimes to settle old scores. It was a game of thrones played on water, with high stakes and no room for error. In the end, what these ancient Polynesians achieved was nothing short of extraordinary. They mastered the largest ocean on earth, with nothing but their wits, courage, and a deep understanding of the natural world. Their voyages may have been driven by necessity, curiosity, or ambition, but the legacy they left behind is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. So next time you punch a destination into your GPS, spare a thought for these original navigators who crossed the world's largest ocean with stars as their guide and the ocean as their only map. If you think navigating the vast Pacific with naught but starry-eyed optimism was impressive, wait till you hear about the vessels that made it possible. the Polynesian double-hulled canoes. These marvels of engineering were more than just boats. They were the sports cars of the ancient world, minus the cup holders and glove compartment. Picture this: 2 sleek hulls running parallel, connected by a sturdy platform. It's like a catamaran, but with a pedigree that makes modern yachts seem like glorified bathtubs. The construction of these canoes was no weekend DIY project. It was a community affair that would put your average barn raising to shame. Forget about a couple of neighbours showing up with tool belts. We're talking entire villages mobilised like a scene out of a Polynesian blockbuster. Crafting a double-hulled canoe was an epic saga, complete with its own cast of characters and plot twists. Chiefs, or should I say the CEOs of canoe construction, directed the project with all the gravitas of a maestro conducting an orchestra. But let's talk logistics. First, you'd need the raw materials. These weren't just any old logs floating downriver. They were carefully selected trees like the mighty koa, prized for its strength and light weight. Felling one of these giants was no small feat. It required both muscle and meticulous planning. Then there was the coconut fibre, nature's answer to duct tape, used to lash the hulls together with a strength that defied the worst the ocean could throw at it. The economics of this endeavour were as intricate as the craftsmanship itself. The labour involved was extensive, requiring coordination and considerable resource allocation. It was a communal effort where everyone had a role, from the master carvers whose chisels were as revered as a sculptor's clay, to the cooks and craftsmen who kept the crew fueled with food and tools. But let's bust a few myths while we're at it. The idea that these vessels were primitive is about as accurate as calling the Mona Lisa a doodle. The double-hulled canoes were technological marvels designed to slice through the ocean with an elegance that modern engineers would envy. They could carry up to 100 people along with their supplies, livestock, and even plants for cultivation. This wasn't just a boat, it was a self-sustaining microcosm afloat on the world's largest ocean. And while it might be tempting to see this as some idyllic kumbaya circle of craftsmanship, the reality was a bit more cutthroat. These canoes were also tools of power and influence, extending a chief's reach far beyond their home island. A well-crafted canoe was like having a fleet of private jets. It was a status symbol, a means to project power across the Pacific. Now, let's talk about the costs. We aren't dealing with dollars and cents here, but the currency of time, effort, and social capital. Crafting a single canoe could take months, sometimes even years, depending on the scale of the project and the resources available. It required a delicate balance of managing human resources and natural materials, a sort of ancient project management that would give today's corporate strategists a run for their money. And here's where the romance of the story meets the harsh light of day. While the idea of a community coming together to build something so grand is heartwarming, it's also true that these projects could strain resources and test alliances. If a chief demanded a canoe for a new voyage, it wasn't just a matter of handing over the keys and saying bon voyage. It meant a redistribution of labour and resources that could impact the entire community. In the end, these canoes were more than just vessels. They were the lifelines of the Polynesian people. They allowed for the exploration and colonization of the Pacific, creating networks of trade and communication that spanned thousands of miles. They were the backbone of a maritime culture that thrived on the open sea, and the legacy of their craftsmanship is a testament to human ingenuity and the power of collective effort. So, next time you see a modern catamaran gliding effortlessly across the water, remember that these sleek vessels owe a debt to the double-hulled canoes of ancient Polynesia. They were the original trailblazers, crafted not just from wood and fibre, but from the dreams and ambitions of a people united by the sea. And while the romantic image of a tranquil voyage across calm waters is appealing, the reality was a complex tapestry of social dynamics, resource management, and sheer willpower. It wasn't just about getting from point A to point B, it was about crafting a legacy that would endure through the ages. If you think this was all about paddling across the Pacific for the fun of it, you're in for a surprise. The motivations behind these epic voyages were as layered as a milfoil pastry, and just as intricate. Sure, the idea of setting sail to discover new lands sounds romantic, but it was also about trade, resources, and yes, spreading a little cultural influence. You see, in the vastness of the Pacific, islands were like tiny outposts of opportunity. and the Polynesians were savvy enough to know that expanding their horizons was as much about survival as it was about curiosity. Let's start with trade. Imagine you're an island chief with a stockpile of breadfruit and a hankering for some fresh pigs. What do? You can't exactly order on Amazon Prime. Instead, you launch an expedition across hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles of ocean. These voyages were the original trade routes, connecting islands in a network of exchange that would make even the Silk Road look like a local farmer's market. From the Marquesas to Hawaii, the trade of goods like taro, sweet potatoes, and even red-feathered birds, a status symbol if there ever was one, was essential in maintaining alliances and ensuring the survival of your people. But it wasn't just about swapping goods. These trips forged cultural bonds that were as strong as the coconut fibers holding their canoes together. The spread of language, religion, and social practices was a byproduct of this maritime mingling. Imagine a cultural exchange program, but instead of gap year students, you have entire communities sharing rituals, stories, and yes, the occasional dance move. This was globalization before globalization was even a thing. Now, let's tackle the myth of the Paradise Islands. The notion that these explorers were always headed to idyllic shores where food fell from trees and life was one eternal luau is a bit of a stretch. Sure, the islands of the Pacific are stunning, but they were also fraught with challenges. Limited resources meant that securing a stable food supply was a constant struggle. Not every island had the fertile land of Hawaii or the abundant marine life of Fiji. The reality was often a harsh lesson in survival, where the bounty of nature had to be carefully managed to prevent disaster. And then there were the social dynamics. Establishing a new settlement was no picnic. It was a careful balancing act of diplomacy and force. You couldn't just waltz onto an island and set up shop. You had to negotiate with existing inhabitants or, in some cases, assert dominance through shows of strength. It's a bit like the Wild West, but with more palm trees and fewer tumbleweeds. The economic implications of these voyages were profound. Accessing new resources could make or break a society. Take the island of Rapa Nui, better known as Easter Island. It became a cautionary tale of resource management gone awry. The island's inhabitants famously built those colossal stone heads, the moai, but overexploitation of resources led to societal collapse. It's a stark reminder that while the ocean was a highway to opportunity, it was also an unforgiving barrier if things went south. But let's not ignore the spiritual side of things. The spread of religion and cultural practices was another significant motivator for these voyages. The Polynesians were deeply spiritual, and their pantheon of gods and myths travelled as surely as their double-hulled canoes. Sacred sites were established, and religious practices were shared and adapted, weaving a spiritual tapestry across the Pacific. This wasn't just about spreading the word of the gods, but also about cementing cultural identity and cohesion among distant kin. Of course, it's easy to get swept up in the romanticism of it all, the idea of noble navigators spreading culture across the sea. But let's not forget the less glamorous aspects. These voyages were grueling. Supplies were limited, and the ocean was as merciless as it was majestic. A single storm could spell disaster, and there was always the risk of not finding land at all. The ocean was the ultimate test of endurance and nerve, where only the strongest or the luckiest survived. In the end, the motivations behind these voyages were as varied as the stars they navigated by. Whether it was the lure of trade, the need for new resources, the spread of culture, or the call of the gods, each journey was a blend of necessity and ambition. And while the reality was often far from the idealized vision of paradise, the impact of these connections on Polynesian societies was undeniable. They created a web of interdependence that spanned the Pacific, a testament to human resilience and adaptability. So next time you gaze out at the ocean, remember that it wasn't just a barrier to be crossed. For the Polynesians, it was a canvas for their aspirations, a vast expanse that connected rather than divided. And while the romantic image of a fearless navigator charting a course to an unknown island is undeniably appealing, the truth is far more complex and, in many ways, even more impressive. It's a story of survival, ingenuity, and the unyielding human spirit that continues to inspire today. But let's not get too caught up in the sunset glow of romanticism, because the reality of those Polynesian voyages was often more survivor than seafaring saga. For every tale of triumph, there were countless stories of trepidation, and it's high time we peel back the layers of legend to reveal the raw nerve of reality. First things first, let's talk about the weather. If you think your local meteorologist gets it wrong, imagine trying to predict the Pacific's mood swings. The ocean wasn't just a body of water, it was the world's largest mood ring, capable of turning from serene to savage in the blink of an eye. Polynesian navigators faced everything from freak squalls to prolonged doldrums, where the sea lay as still as a pond, leaving sailors becalmed and supplies dwindling. And let's be honest, these weren't folks with a pantry full of canned beans and bottled water. Their provisions were as limited as a minimalist's wardrobe. Now, when it comes to food and water, let's just say these navigators weren't exactly dining on multi-course meals. The staple diet on board consisted of preserved breadfruit, taro, and dried fish. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of astronaut food, minus the vacuum-sealed packaging. Water was rationed more tightly than a miser's purse strings, and running out wasn't just inconvenient, it was a death sentence. Oral traditions and historical accounts speak of crews resorting to catching rainwater in sails, or even drinking fish blood to survive. Desperate times indeed. But the real kicker? The ever-present spectre of getting lost. Imagine setting off on a journey where your entire navigation system depends on reading the stars, waves and winds. One cloudy night could throw the whole operation into chaos. It's like using a paper map in a thunderstorm. You're flying blind. Even the most skilled navigators could miscalculate, leading to tragic tales of canoes disappearing into the abyss, never to be seen again. The ocean was a vast expanse, and without landmarks, every wave looked like the last. It was a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek with nature, and the ocean wasn't playing fair. Yet, despite these challenges, the allure of the sea was undeniable. The idea of uncharted islands and untold riches was a siren call too enticing to resist. The romantic image of the fearless explorer, hair tousled by the salty breeze, navigating by the stars, is an enduring one. But let's not kid ourselves. These sailors weren't doing it for Instagram glory. The reality was far more grueling and, often, grim. They were pioneers, yes, but pioneers who faced the very real possibility of never returning home. And while we're on the subject of homecomings, let's dive into the impact these voyages had on the collective memory of Polynesian societies. Oral traditions have preserved the stories of these epic journeys, shaping cultural identities and reinforcing the values of courage, resilience, and ingenuity. But these tales weren't just bedtime stories. They were educational tools, passing down navigational knowledge and survival strategies from generation to generation. They were the original how-to guides for life at sea, a compendium of wisdom etched in the minds of those who dared to venture beyond the horizon. Historically, these experiences left an indelible mark on Polynesian culture. The voyagers were celebrated not just for their discoveries, but for their sheer determination to face the unknown. They were the rock stars of their time, returning to their islands with tales of bravery and endurance that would be sung and recounted for years to come. But like any rock star, their lives were fraught with the tension between legend and reality. The same voyages that brought them glory could just as easily bring them to ruin. And let's not overlook the economic implications of these journeys. A successful voyage could mean the difference between prosperity and poverty for an island community. New trade routes could be established, bringing in goods and resources that were otherwise unavailable. But a failed voyage could drain resources and manpower, leaving a community vulnerable. It was a calculated risk, one that weighed heavily on the minds of the chiefs and navigators who orchestrated these maritime endeavours. In the end, the challenges faced by Polynesian navigators were as formidable as the ocean itself. They were the original risk-takers, venturing into the unknown with nothing but their wits and a deep understanding of the natural world to guide them. The romanticized image of the noble navigator is certainly appealing, but the reality was a complex tapestry of danger, determination, and destiny. These voyages were not just a testament to human ingenuity, but also a reminder of the relentless power of the sea, a force that could make or break even the bravest of souls. So, the next time you find yourself daydreaming about a life of adventure on the open ocean, remember the Polynesian navigators who lived it. Their stories are not just tales of daring do, but powerful reminders of the resilience and resourcefulness required to survive in a world where the horizon was both a boundary and a beckoning call. And while the romantic allure of the sea continues to captivate our imaginations, the truth of those voyages is a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who dared to dream beyond the shore. Yet, as time marched on, the echoes of Polynesian navigators' daring feats began to fade, like footprints on a sandy shore washed away by the relentless tides of history. But don't cue the sad violins just yet. This isn't some nostalgic lament for lost glory. Instead, it's a story of resurgence, of ancient wisdom finding new relevance in our modern world, much like vinyl records making a comeback in the digital age. Fast forward to the 1970s, a period not just known for disco balls and bell-bottom jeans, but also for a renaissance in traditional navigation. This was the decade when a group of intrepid voyagers, armed not with GPS gadgets but with a thirst to rediscover the old ways, decided to bring back the nearly lost art of Polynesian navigation. Into the Hochliar, a double-hulled canoe that took to the seas in 1976, recreating the legendary voyages of their ancestors. This wasn't just a nod to history, it was a full-blown cultural revival, a bid to reclaim a legacy that had been overshadowed by centuries of Western influence and technological domination. The Hochliar's journey from Hawaii to Tahiti wasn't just about proving a point, it was a 2,500-mile testament to the enduring power of traditional knowledge. Guided by master navigator Mau Pialug, who relied solely on the stars, waves and winds, the journey was a resounding success. This modern odyssey sparked a renewed interest in Polynesian navigation, shifting it from the dusty pages of history back to the forefront of cultural consciousness. It was like the moment you realize your grandma's old recipes are actually culinary gold, and suddenly everyone's clamoring for a taste. This resurgence wasn't merely about romanticizing the past, though that was certainly part of the charm. It was also about recognizing the practical applications of traditional navigation, especially in an era where environmental sustainability is more than just a buzzword. By understanding and respecting natural patterns, these navigators had mastered a way of life that left a minimal footprint, long before eco-friendlies became a marketing mantra. In a world increasingly conscious of its carbon emissions, the idea of harnessing nature's cues rather than relying on fuel-guzzling engines is not just quaint, it's revolutionary. But let's not get too swept away with the romance of it all. The reality is that reviving such ancient practices requires a delicate balance between myth and reality. It's easy to fall into the trap of idealizing the past, of painting these navigators as demigods who glided effortlessly across the ocean. The truth is, their journeys were fraught with danger, their successes hard-won through skill, perseverance, and a touch of luck. Acknowledging this complexity doesn't diminish their achievements, it enriches them, providing a fuller picture of what it means to be human in the face of nature's vast challenges. In modern times, the legacy of Polynesian navigation is not just a cultural curiosity, it's a beacon of resilience and adaptability. As climate change threatens coastal communities worldwide, the lessons of these ancient mariners about respect for the environment, sustainable living, and the power of community are more relevant than ever. They remind us that progress isn't always about moving forward at breakneck speed. Sometimes it's about looking back and learning from those who came before. The story of Polynesian navigation is also a reminder of the importance of storytelling itself. Myths and legends, while often embellished, serve as vital links to our past, carrying the essence of cultural identity across generations. They are the threads that weave together the fabric of history, connecting us to the dreams and struggles of our ancestors. In a world where everything seems to be moving towards the ephemeral, maintaining these connections is crucial. The balance between myth and reality isn't a tug-of-war, it's a dance, one that allows us to celebrate the romance of exploration while respecting the grit and determination it demands. So, as we wrap up our journey through the vast and vibrant tapestry of Polynesian navigation, let's take a moment to appreciate the enduring legacy of these ancient mariners. They were the original adventurers, the pioneers who dared to dream beyond the horizon, armed with nothing but their wits and an unyielding spirit. Their story is one of survival, ingenuity, and the unbreakable bond between humanity and the natural world. In the end, whether you're gazing at the stars or navigating the complexities of modern life, The lessons of these ancient navigators remain as relevant as ever. They remind us that the journey is as important as the destination, that the past holds valuable lessons for the future, and that the sea, in all its vastness and mystery, is both a challenge to conquer and a partner to respect. The romance of the open ocean may captivate our imaginations, but it's the resilience of the human spirit that truly leaves its mark on history. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, let the stories of these fearless voyagers lull you to sleep, their legacy a comforting reminder that no matter how vast the ocean or how fierce the storm, the dawn always brings the promise of new horizons. Sweet dreams, fellow explorers. Your eyes flutter open, greeted not by the golden glow of a Hollywood sepia filter, but by the greyish light creeping through the gaps of your wooden longhouse. Welcome to 5th century Kent, where the morning chill has the audacity to slip through every crack, reminding you that insulation is a modern luxury. You're a Saxon chieftain. But before you get too high on your chieftain horse, let me burst a bubble or two. There are no grand halls here, no sprawling tapestries, just a sturdy wooden structure with a thatched roof that does its best to keep the elements at bay. The movies might have you believe you're waking up in a realm of grandeur, but reality's knocking and it's got splinters. Your bed's not exactly a temple of comfort, more like a hay-stuffed sack on a wooden frame. It's not the worst, but let's just say there's a reason beds are one of history's most improved inventions. As you stretch out the kinks in your back, you realize the day ahead is less about warrior glory and more about keeping your band of Saxons fed, clothed and bartered into contentment. Speaking of which, let's talk breakfast. Forget the idea of an endless feast of meats. Your diet's more about practicality than indulgence. Sure, you might have some pork, but it's not like you're drowning in bacon. You're more likely to break your fast with some porridge made from oats or barley. If you're lucky, there's honey to sweeten the deal, but let's not get carried away with fantasies of a medieval IHOP. Now, about that wardrobe of yours. You're not strutting around in some chainmail couture or fur-trimmed regalia. Your clothing is straightforward, a tunic made of wool because warmth is non-negotiable. It's dyed in whatever colour plant materials could be bothered to produce, likely a muted hue that speaks more of economy than extravagance. Your trousers, or braquet if you're feeling fancy, are simple and sturdy. They're the jeans of your time, practical and essential for a life that involves more mud than marble halls. And let's chew through another myth while we're at it, hygiene. Believe it or not, you're not the dirty medieval stereotype. You might not have a hot shower awaiting, but you know the value of cleanliness. Soap's not exactly Dove, but you've got a mix of ash and animal fat that does the trick. The rivers and streams are your best friends for a quick wash, and you even have a comb made from bone or wood to tackle those 5th century tangles. Now, let's dive into the economy, a fascinating beast that operates without a single minted coin. You're in the thick of a barter system where goods and services are the currency of the day. Need a new axe? Better have some grain or livestock to trade. This isn't the age of credit cards, my friend, and each transaction involves more negotiation than a modern real estate deal. It's like Craigslist, but with more haggling and fewer scams involving Nigerian princes. Your morning is spent in a series of exchanges, both literal and social. Authority as a chieftain isn't just about brawn, it's about brains and relationships. You're not commanding an army, you're managing a community. You listen to grievances, settle disputes, and ensure everyone knows that loyalty to you means mutual survival. It's less about power trips and more about keeping the peace in a world where an argument can escalate to something much more, shall we say, pointy. This life isn't a Hollywood script, but it's rich with its own brand of drama and complexity. As you step outside, you take a moment to appreciate the landscape, vast, untamed, and yours to navigate. The day is young, and while it may lack the romanticized sheen of legend, the reality is that your role as a Saxon chieftain is anything but dull. It's a day-to-day challenge of leadership, survival, and yes, the occasional bit of glory when the opportunity arises. So, shake off the morning frost, tighten that belt, and get ready to embrace whatever the 5th century throws your way. There's a day full of history waiting to unfold, and you're right at the heart of it. As you step into the chilly morning air of 5th century Kent, you're not just shaking off the frost, you're stepping into a political labyrinth as twisty as any thriller. Forget any notions of a united Saxon kingdom. Your world is a patchwork of tribes, stitched together by the wiliest of chieftains, each jostling for a slice of the English pie. This isn't Game of Thrones. There's less glamour and more grime, but the stakes are just as high. You, as a chieftain, are a political maestro, or at least you try to be. Your tribe's survival hangs on the alliances you forge, not out of any romantic vision of unity, but from the cold, hard reality that alone you're about as stable as a one-legged stool. The Saxon tribes are like squabbling siblings, more likely to raid each other's cattle than to share a drink around the campfire. But when the Picts or Scots get too close for comfort, suddenly everyone's in the mood for a bit of brotherly love. It's all about survival, baby, not kumbaya. Now, let's tackle that myth of the noble savage head-on. It's a tantalizing image, isn't it? Dashing chieftains in fur cloaks, leading their warriors into battle with nothing but honor and fierce independence. Romantic? Sure. Accurate? Not so much. The Realpolitik of your time is less about poetic ideals and more about who's got the bigger axe. Land means power, and power means you get to make the rules, or at least bend them to your liking. Speaking of land, controlling it is a full-time job. Forget fences or walls, your borders are as fluid as a river in flood season. Defense strategies involve more than just muscle. You need cunning, alliances, and a keen sense of when to fight and when to flee. You're constantly weighing the benefits of a skirmish against the cost of losing good warriors because, spoiler alert, they don't grow on trees. You're balancing on a political knife edge, negotiating with other chieftains like you're bartering at a medieval swap meet. Let's not forget the economic context, a beast as complex as any dragon. Without minted coins, your economy is a high-stakes barter system, a delicate dance of give and take with the occasional step on the toes. It's about trading not just goods but favors, allegiances, and sometimes your dignity. You're constantly calculating the value of a bushel of grain versus the goodwill of a neighboring tribe. This isn't just economics, it's survival 101. Now, you might be wondering about those alliances you're crafting. Are they worth the hassle? Absolutely. But don't get too cozy. They're as fragile as a peace treaty in a schoolyard. One wrong move, like a slight at a feast or a broken promise, and you could find yourself on the wrong end of a spear. It's not just about who you know, but who you can trust not to stab you in the back. Literally. Let's take a historical detour to explore one of your contemporaries, Hengist, a name that might resonate if you've ever dabbled in Saxon lore. Hengist was a chieftain who played the political chess game like a grandmaster. According to the chronicles, he managed to carve out a kingdom in Kent by first serving as a mercenary for the Britons, then turning the tables to establish his own power base. It's a classic case of opportunism over idealism, and it's a strategy you can't help but admire, even if it's a bit Machiavellian centuries before Machiavelli was even a twinkle in history's eye. This era's politics are less about grand visions and more about the cold calculus of survival. You're juggling allegiances like flaming torches, trying not to get burned. It's a world where today's ally could be tomorrow's rival, and you're constantly searching for that sweet spot between aggression and diplomacy. It's a delicate dance, and there's no safety net. But hey, who doesn't love a little danger in their morning routine? As the day unfolds, you're not just making decisions, you're shaping the future of your tribe. These choices are the building blocks of history, even if they don't come with the dramatic flair of epic battles or cinematic speeches. They're the real stories of leadership, of navigating a world that's as unpredictable as the English weather. So, tighten your tunic, adjust your braquet, and get ready to dive into the murky waters of Saxon politics. It's a wild ride full of twists, turns, and more than a few surprises. But that's the life of a chieftain for you. Never a dull moment, even if it's not always the glamorous adventure Hollywood likes to sell. Welcome to the real history, where every decision counts, and every day is a new chapter waiting to be written. As the morning mist gives way to the harsh light of reality, you find yourself squarely in the thick of an age-old tradition, the council meeting. If you're picturing a round table with knights in gleaming armor, think again. This is 5th century Kent, not Camelot. There are no heralds announcing your entrance, no trumpets tooting your achievements. Instead, you're greeted by the smell of sweat and the low murmur of voices, a more authentic ambience for a gathering of Saxon chieftains. Your council chamber is a clearing in the woods or perhaps a large hall, depending on how fancy your tribe is feeling. The focus here isn't architectural grandeur, but the gritty business of governance. The scene is more barter than banter, with chieftains seated around a simple wooden table, each sporting varying degrees of woolen fashion. The air is thick with the scent of earthy practicality, a hint of smoke from nearby cooking fires, and the occasional waft of something that suggests personal hygiene could use a modern upgrade. Let's burst another bubble here. This isn't a forum for grandiloquent speeches. No one's quoting Shakespeare. He's still over 1,000 years away from stealing the show. Instead, it's about practical negotiations, where the stakes are as high as your blood pressure during a particularly heated debate. Your fellow chieftains are here not for the love of governance, but because the survival of their people depends on it. It's a meeting of minds, each as sharp as their swords, with decisions made in a blend of reason, persuasion, and the occasional thinly veiled threat. The legal system you're working with is about as predictable as a cat on catnip. Forget the notion of a neat, codified set of laws. You've got a mix of tribal customs, oral traditions, and a dash of Roman influence still lingering like a ghost at the feast. Justice is swift and often brutal, handed down by those with enough muscle to enforce it. If you manage to leave this meeting without a blood feud, consider it a success. One of today's hot topics? Disputes over land boundaries, which are about as clear as the Thames on a foggy day. Borders shift like sand, and your tribe's claim to a patch of fertile soil is as solid as your ability to defend it. It's a tricky dance, balancing the rights of your people with the demands of neighboring tribes. One wrong move, and you might find yourself having to defend your land with more than just words. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, women. Contrary to what some dusty old books might suggest, women in 5th century Kent weren't just looming in the shadows, weaving cloth and popping out airs. They played a role in politics that goes beyond the domestic sphere. In fact, some women wielded significant power, either through marriage alliances or by sheer force of personality. Take Queen Bertha of Kent, for example, who would later pave the way for Christianity's introduction to the region. Her influence was felt not just in the home, but in the halls of power, proving that the idea of women as political players isn't just a modern construct. Women could own land, manage estates, and make decisions that affected the future of the tribe. Sure, they weren't the ones swinging swords on the battlefield, but their strategic marriages and alliances often meant the difference between peace and war. Think of them as the unsung orchestrators of Saxon society, pulling strings in a way that would make a modern CEO nod in respect. As the meeting progresses, you realize that today's agenda is less about changing the world and more about ensuring that tomorrow comes with fewer surprises. You're negotiating trade agreements, resolving disputes, and ensuring that everyone leaves the table with a sense of mutual benefit, or at least without a fresh vendetta. It's a delicate balance, like trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. But don't let the apparent mundanity fool you. These decisions, while lacking the glamour of a battlefield victory, are the true backbone of your tribe's survival. Each agreement is a step toward stability, each handshake a promise that, for now, peace will prevail. It's the kind of political maneuvering that won't make it into epic poems, but it's the stuff of real history, gritty, complex, and essential. As the council meeting wraps up, you step outside, greeted once more by the chill of the afternoon air. The decisions made today might not be as thrilling as a clash of swords, but they're the foundation upon which your tribe's future is built. And as you head back to your longhouse, you can't help but appreciate the subtle power of negotiation over the sword. In the end, it's not just about who has the biggest axe, but who can wield it with the most finesse. So, as you walk away from the meeting, you're not just a chieftain, you're a leader, a negotiator, and a protector of your people's future. And while history might not remember the specifics of today's council as vividly as a glorious battle, you know that these moments are the true test of leadership. It's a messy, unpredictable world, but it's yours to navigate, one decision at a time. As you stroll back to your longhouse, you can't help but reflect on the tangled web of connections that define your life as a Saxon chieftain. Forget the glossy image of the lone hero conquering the world with nothing but a sword and a steely gaze. In reality, your survival hinges not on solitary heroics, but on the intricate tapestry of kinship ties binding your community together. Picture this. Your tribe is more of a sprawling family reunion than a corporate boardroom, with bonds of blood and marriage weaving a safety net that's as complex as it is resilient. In 5th century Kent, kinship isn't just an afterthought, it's the social security system, the life insurance policy, and the political alliance all rolled into one. It's like LinkedIn, but with more livestock and fewer spam messages. Economic implications? Oh, they're huge. We're not just talking about warm fuzzies and family dinners here. Marriages are strategic moves, each one a chess piece placed with precision to secure land, resources, or alliances. You see, in a world where wealth is measured in sheep and grain rather than coins, who you marry can make or break your fortunes. A well-placed marriage alliance could mean the difference between feast and famine, and your children become the living contracts that bind tribes together. Take the marriage of Ethelbert of Kent and Bertha, for instance. It wasn't just a romantic saga worthy of a Netflix special, it was a game-changer for the Saxons. By marrying a Christian Frankish princess, Ethelbert not only strengthened ties with the continent, but also paved the way for Christianity's spread to Kent. In this era, love is great and all, but land and influence? Now that's the stuff of epic ballads. And let's not forget the communal aspect of all this. Decisions aren't made in isolation, they're a group project where everyone has a say, whether you like it or not. The myth of the solitary warrior, charging into battle with nothing but grit and glory, is just that, a myth. Real power comes from consensus, from the Chieftain's Council where decisions are hashed out over flagons of ale and the occasional heated debate. It's democracy, but with more beards and less bureaucracy. Every move you make is scrutinized by your kin, because what you do reflects on them. It's a bit like living in a medieval fishbowl, where privacy is as rare as a unicorn. Your actions, good or bad, ripple through the community, affecting everything from trade negotiations to marriage prospects. It's like being the star in a reality show where everyone knows your name and your business. These social structures are the backbone of your society, a complex dance of alliances and obligations that keep the Saxon world spinning. They define not just who you are, but what your tribe can become. It's like a medieval version of Survivor, only the stakes are real, and there's no island or Jeff props to guide you, just the harsh realities of life in the 5th century. So, as the sun sets over Kent and the shadows lengthen, you're not just a chieftain settling in for the night. You're a part of something much bigger, a network of kinship ties that define your world, shaping every decision and every dream. It's a world that's as gritty as it is grand, where every day is a new chapter in the Saxon saga, and as you close your eyes, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring. As you drift into a restless sleep, the flickering fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, your thoughts wander to the spiritual realm that governs your existence. In 5th century Kent, life isn't just about the visible, it's a complex tapestry interwoven with the supernatural. Forget the Hollywood caricature of Saxons as nothing more than axe-wielding pagans. Your spiritual beliefs are as rich as a tapestry and as intricate as your grandmother's knitting. Let's start by dispelling the myth that you're a bunch of wild-eyed pagans with a penchant for sacrificing anything that moves. Sure, you've got your fair share of gods and spirits, but it's not all blood and thunder. Your pantheon is a dynamic ensemble of deities, each with its own quirks and responsibilities. They're the original multitaskers, governing everything from the harvest to the weather, love, war, and everything in between. Think of them as a divine customer service team, each god with a specific hotline for your earthly woes. Odin might be the head honcho in some regions, but in your neck of the woods, Woden is the name on everyone's lips. He's a god of war and wisdom, a complex character who embodies the duality of Saxon life, fierce yet thoughtful, a master of runes and a wielder of power. It's like having a CEO who's also a philosopher, leading the charge into battle while pondering the meaning of life. Then there's Thunor, your go-to guy when it comes to thunder and protection. He's the kind of god you want on your side in a storm, wielding his hammer to ward off chaos. And let's not forget Tiao, the god of war and law. He's the embodiment of justice, the cosmic judge presiding over disputes with a firm yet fair hand. It's like having a celestial legal team at your disposal, ready to arbitrate both earthly and divine conflicts. But it's not all about the gods. You also have spirits, ancestors, and a host of otherworldly beings flitting about your consciousness. Every forest has its guardian, every stream its nymph. They're the unseen forces that shape your world, influencing everything from the success of your crops to the health of your livestock. Your life is a constant negotiation with these entities, a delicate balance between respect and appeasement that keeps the cosmic scales from tipping out of favor. And let's not overlook the transition towards Christianity, a slow, complex process that's less about sudden conversions and more about gradual integration. It's not like someone flipped a switch and suddenly everyone started singing hymns. The conversion is a political chess game, with chieftains like you weighing the benefits of aligning with the Christian world against the traditions that have served your people for generations. It's a bit like introducing a new operating system to a well-loved but outdated computer. There's a lot of trial and error and plenty of resistance from those who prefer the old ways. Queen Bertha, with her Frankish Christian roots, is a game-changer here. Her influence is felt as a gentle nudge towards the new faith, opening doors to alliances that are as much about political gain as spiritual salvation. It's a strategic move, one that sees the introduction of churches and the slow but steady spread of Christianity across the landscape. But don't be fooled into thinking it's a clean sweep. The old gods and new coexist, sometimes uneasily, in a landscape where belief is as flexible as the shifting sands of the nearby coastline. This fusion of old and new isn't just a religious phenomenon, it's a social revolution. Christianity brings with it new structures, new laws, and a new way of viewing the world. It's like installing an upgrade that changes the entire operating system, affecting everything from governance to daily life. Yet, like any major change, it's met with resistance, with the old ways lingering like a familiar tune that refuses to fade. As a chieftain, you're not just a political leader, you're a spiritual guide, navigating your tribe through this transitional period. You're balancing the demands of tradition with the allure of new opportunities, steering your community through the murky waters of religious evolution. It's a tightrope walk, with the stakes higher than any battle, because these decisions will shape the very soul of your people for generations to come. But let's not romanticize this into some epic saga of good versus evil. The reality is far messier. The myths that paint you as a noble leader, striding boldly into a new era, gloss over the gritty details, the compromises, the hard choices, the pushback from those who see the new faith as a threat to their way of life. It's not a tale of triumph, but a story of survival, a testament to the adaptability that defines your leadership. In the end, what remains is a legacy that's as complex as the weave of your tunic. The myths might remember you as a chieftain of great power and wisdom, but the truth is far more nuanced. You're a leader in a time of transition, balancing the old with the new, navigating the uncharted waters of a world in flux. It's not about being remembered as a hero, it's about ensuring that your people survive to see the dawn of a new day. So, as the fire dies down and the shadows deepen, you drift into sleep, not as a mythical figure of legend, but as a chieftain grounded in the reality of your time. Your world is one of change and challenge, where every decision carries the weight of the future and every choice shapes the course of history. It's a story not of grandiose heroics, but of quiet resilience, a legacy that's as enduring as the land you call home. In the prim and proper chaos of Victorian England, where people drank tea like it was going out of style and corsets were tighter than a miser's purse strings, Emmeline Pankhurst was born on July the 15th, 1858. Now, if you're looking for a time when contradictions were as common as chimney sweeps, this was it. On one hand, Victorian society believed women were too delicate for the rough-and-tumble world of politics, but they were apparently robust enough to manage households teeming with children, servants, and the occasional overly affectionate parlour ghost. Why should women wield political power when they could handle screaming toddlers and boiling laundry all at once? Truly a mystery for the ages. Emmeline's early days were set against this backdrop of societal double standards. Her parents, Robert and Sophia Goulden, were anything but ordinary. They were as politically active as a couple could be without actually running for office. Robert was a well-known supporter of the anti-slavery movement, and Sophia, well, she was probably the kind of woman who could organise a protest with one hand while stirring a pot of stew with the other. Their home in Manchester was a hub of political discourse, where words like equality and justice were as common as pass the salt. Now, let's talk about Manchester, the city that was the industrial heart of England, and the beating pulse of new ideas. It was the kind of place where you could smell the coal smoke and ambition in the air, where the clatter of textile mills was the soundtrack of progress. In this bustling city, young Emmeline was exposed to conversations about rights and reform that would shape her world view. Little Emmeline must have been a curious child, the kind who asked one too many questions at the dinner table, much to the chagrin of any Victorian dinner guest who thought women should be seen and not heard. She attended the École Normale de Nuit in Paris at the age of 15, a school known for its progressive ideas about women's education. While many of her contemporaries were learning how to perfect their embroidery, Emmeline was learning about Voltaire and Rousseau, thinkers who were all about challenging authority rather than dusting it. The French school must have been a revelation to her, a place where she realized that women could aspire to be more than just the keeper of impeccably fluffed cushions. Back in England, the suffrage movement was starting to simmer. It was a bit like a pot left on a low flame, bubbling with potential but not quite at a rolling boil. In 1867, the Second Reform Act expanded voting rights to more men, but women were still left out in the political cold. They were told to be patient, to wait their turn, as if political equality was a pleasant dessert that would eventually be served if they were good girls. Emmeline, however, was not in the mood for patience. Her parents' involvement in the fight for social justice had planted a seed that was starting to take root. The Goulden household was also a lively place full of siblings, 10 in total. Imagine the noise. It was like running a small country, and yet Emmeline's mother managed it all while still finding time to be politically active. This juggling act was not lost on Emmeline, who saw firsthand the absurdity of women being deemed too fragile for politics, but perfectly strong enough to handle a dozen kids and the complexities of a household. Talk about a real-life lesson in hypocrisy. But let's get back to the humour in this situation because, oh boy, was Victorian society a goldmine for irony? Women were supposedly too weak to vote, yet they were expected to survive the perils of childbirth, an endeavour that was far riskier than casting a ballot. They were considered the moral compass of the family, yet were kept politically voiceless, as if morality was a one-way street. Victorian England was a place where women could be entrusted with the care of future prime ministers, but not trusted with a simple cross on a voting slip. Makes perfect sense, right? While Emmeline was growing up, she must have noticed how the men in her life were treated with a kind of automatic respect, simply for having Y chromosomes. Meanwhile, women were praised for their silence and composure, a societal pat on the back for being quietly subservient. This was the world Emmeline was preparing to challenge, armed with the knowledge and the audacity she gained from her parents and her education. Little did she know she would grow up to be a thorn in the side of the British establishment, a woman who would redefine what it meant to be delicate. As Emmeline entered adulthood, she would find herself asking a question that would drive her life's work. If women could manage households, communities, and the very fabric of social life, why on earth couldn't they manage a vote? With the grit of a northern industrial worker and the determination of a French revolutionary, Emmeline Pankhurst was about to step into the spotlight. Victorian society had no idea what was coming. Emmeline Pankhurst, with her steely determination and a flair for the dramatic, wasn't just going to wait around for society to hand her a voting slip. No, she was going to grab it with both hands and maybe a megaphone for good measure. Fast forward to 1903, and she's done exactly that by founding the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU. Picture this as less of a polite tea party and more of a revolutionary book club where the books are optional and the revolution is mandatory. The WSPU wasn't about to play nice in the sandbox of polite society. Their motto, "Deeds not words," was like a battle cry echoing through the musty halls of government and the even mustier minds of those who thought women should be content with domestic bliss. Emmeline and her band of suffragettes were ready to take the political world by storm. Armed with more than just persuasive pamphlets and hopeful prayers, they were prepared to disrupt, and disrupt they did. Let's take a moment to appreciate the audacity of their tactics. Picture a group of women chaining themselves to the railings of Parliament, not because they couldn't find the key to their handcuffs, but because they wanted to make a point. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill protest. This was a spectacle. And if you think chaining yourself to a fence is extreme, imagine the sight of them smashing windows in the West End or staging hunger strikes in prison. These women were the original headline-grabbing activists, and they knew that a well-placed stunt was worth 1,000 placards. The public reaction? Well, let's just say it was a mixed bag. On one hand, There were those who admired their courage, seeing them as trailblazers in a world that desperately needed change. On the other hand, there were folks who thought these women had gone off the deep end, perhaps needing a good dose of smelling salts and a lie down. The media had a field day, of course. Some papers praised them as heroines fighting for justice, while others painted them as hysterical troublemakers who should be more concerned with knitting than knocking down doors. Emmeline Pankhurst, however, was not one to be easily swayed by public opinion. Her leadership style was as uncompromising as it was effective. She was a master strategist, understanding that to effect real change, you sometimes have to ruffle a few feathers, or in this case, a few politicians. Emmeline orchestrated these militant tactics with the precision of a military general, ensuring that each action was calculated to keep the suffrage movement in the public eye. The suffragettes' methods were a stark contrast to the more peaceful approaches favoured by other suffrage organisations, like the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, NUWSSS, led by the ever-diplomatic Millicent Fawcett. While Fawcett believed in patient persuasion, Emmeline and her WSPU believed in shaking things up. Theirs was a political theatre designed to make the establishment uncomfortable enough to finally pay attention. Now, if you're thinking these actions sound like a blueprint for today's viral protest tactics, you're not far off. Imagine them trending on social media, e-railing challenges, anyone? The suffragettes were nothing if not masters of the meme-worthy moment, long before the internet was a twinkle in anyone's eye. They understood the power of a bold gesture and the importance of being seen, a lesson modern activists have taken to heart. Of course, not everyone was clapping along. Many were appalled at the lengths these women would go to. When Emmeline and her comrades were arrested, which happened with almost predictable regularity, they turned their trials into platforms making speeches that newspapers couldn't help but cover. It was the kind of courtroom drama that would give today's legal thrillers a run for their money. And when imprisoned, they took their protests behind bars, refusing food and forcing the government to deal with the consequences of their actions. The economic context of the time added layers to this already complex scene. Britain in the early 1900s was a nation grappling with its identity. Industrialization had changed the landscape, both literally and socially, and the role of women was evolving. Women were entering the workforce in increasing numbers, yet they had no political power to influence the laws that affected their lives. The suffragettes' campaign highlighted this contradiction, making it difficult for the establishment to ignore the growing demand for equality. Emmeline Pankhurst understood the power of narrative and symbolism in her fight for suffrage. She knew that the image of women standing firm against a backdrop of systemic inequality was a powerful one. She utilized every opportunity to highlight the absurdity of a system that placed women in positions of responsibility in commerce and industry, but denied them a voice in the legislative process that governed those very roles. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, the WSPU grew in strength and numbers. By 1910, the organization had over 50,000 members, each one inspired by Emmeline's vision and relentless energy. They were not just followers, but participants in a movement that was reshaping the national conversation about gender and power. And while some might have dismissed them as a nuisance, they were, in reality, the harbingers of change, forcing a nation to confront its outdated notions of gender roles. To truly appreciate the impact of the WSPU and Emmeline's leadership, it's crucial to understand that they were much more than just a group of disgruntled women. They were a force of nature, a group united by a shared belief in the possibility of a fairer world. And as the movement gained momentum, it became clear that their deeds, not words, motto wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was a promise, a commitment to action in the face of apathy and opposition. In the end, the suffragette story is one of grit and determination, a testament to the power of standing up for what you believe in, even when the odds are stacked against you. Emmeline Pankhurst and her comrades were not content to wait for change. They made it happen. And while their methods may have raised eyebrows and hackles, there's no denying they put the issue of women's suffrage firmly on the map. Their legacy is a reminder that sometimes you have to make a little noise to be heard. And my, did they make quite the racket. And just when you thought the suffragettes had reached the pinnacle of their defiant creativity, they took a deep breath, raised an eyebrow at societal norms, and escalated their campaign to a whole new level. As the clock ticked closer to World War I, the suffragette movement's activities became as intense as the scandalized headlines they generated. The Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU, had a knack for knowing just when to dial up the drama, and the years leading up to the Great War were no exception. Take, for instance, the notorious Epsom Derby of 1913. This was not just any horse race, it was the social event of the year, attended by the creme de la creme of British society, including King George V himself. Enter Emily Davison, a suffragette who had zero intention of blending into the crowd. On June 4, 1913, with the eyes of the nation glued to the racecourse, Davison stepped onto the track and into the annals of history. She was struck by the King's horse, Anma, in a daring act of protest that had everyone gasping, some in outrage, others in admiration. Emily Davison became a martyr for the suffragette cause, her tragic death at the age of 40 serving as a stark reminder of the lengths to which these women would go to be heard. Now, here's where the legend and the reality do their little dance. The romanticized version paints Davison as a fearless hero, a tragic figure who sacrificed herself for the greater good. But let's not gloss over the gritty details. The Derby wasn't just a spontaneous decision. It was a calculated risk in a campaign that had already seen Davison arrested 9 times and force-fed 49 times during hunger strikes. That's the kind of dedication that makes you wonder if she had a punch card for prison visits or a frequent flyer program for suffrage martyrs. The harsh realities suffragettes faced don't end there. Police brutality was as much a part of their world as the banners they carried. Picture it, women, dressed in their Edwardian best, being manhandled by policemen who were likely as confused by their orders as the suffragettes were by their lack of voting rights. There are accounts of policemen dragging women by their hair, using tactics that would make even the most hardened rugby player wince. And when these women were inevitably arrested, the conditions they endured in prison were anything but cushy. Forget about a comfy cell with 3 square meals. Think instead of damp walls, minimal rations, and the ever-present threat of force-feeding. The latter was a particularly grim practice involving tubes and a complete disregard for human rights, all in the name of maintaining order. But let's not forget the financial aspect of this crusade. Running a campaign isn't cheap, and the suffragettes were nothing if not resourceful fundraisers. They had to finance everything from printing pamphlets to bailing out their members from jail. Not your average bake sale, to say the least. Events like suffrage bazaars became essential. These gatherings were a mix of social event and political statement, where guests could peruse suffrage-themed merchandise, everything from buttons to handkerchiefs, all designed to keep the movement afloat financially. The WSPU even opened shops selling everything from tea sets to clothing, cleverly branded with the suffragette colours of purple, white and green. The economic burden was hefty, but they managed it with a mix of ingenuity and relentless determination, often tapping into the pockets of their wealthier supporters. And let's talk about the economic context of Britain during this tumultuous time. The country was a global powerhouse, yet internally it was wrestling with class disparities and the role of women in a rapidly industrializing society. Women were entering the workforce in droves, their nimble fingers a boon to factories, yet they were denied a say in the governance that impacted their lives. This disconnect was a glaring inconsistency in a nation that prided itself on being a beacon of democracy. The suffragettes highlighted this contradiction with every protest, every arrest, every speech, and every strategic act of defiance. The movement wasn't just about making noise, it was about making change. And while the suffragettes were busy smashing windows and refusing to eat, the establishment was slowly starting to take notice. The government, in a bid to curb the rising tide of suffragette militancy, introduced the notorious Cat and Mouse Act in 1913. Officially known as the Prisoners' Temporary Discharge for Ill Health Act, it allowed for the release of hunger-striking suffragettes who were on the brink of death, only to rearrest them once they had recovered. It was a game of cat and mouse, all right, but with stakes higher than anyone in Parliament was prepared to acknowledge. Despite the risks and the mounting tension, the suffragettes remained undeterred. They continued to push the boundaries, knowing full well that their actions were not just about winning the vote, but about redefining women's roles in society. They were fighting for a seat at the table, armed with a tenacity that was equal parts inspiring and intimidating. And as the world teetered on the brink of war, the suffragettes' battle cry only grew louder, a clarion call for justice in a world that was anything but just. As we leave this chapter, the stage is set for the suffragettes' next moves, their resolve unshaken despite the formidable challenges they faced. The world was changing rapidly, and these women were determined to ensure that they were not left behind. The suffragettes were not just fighting for a vote, they were fighting for a revolution, one that would echo through the decades. And with the spectre of war looming large, the suffragettes were ready to face whatever came next with the same unyielding spirit that had brought them this far. Stay tuned, because the story of Emmeline Pankhurst and her indomitable band of suffragettes is far from over. As the spectre of World War I loomed like an uninvited guest at a peace rally, the suffragettes found themselves at a crossroads. With Europe teetering on the brink of conflict, Emmeline Pankhurst and her merry band of militants faced a decision that would test their resolve and redefine their movement. In a twist more ironic than a Victorian novel's plot twist, the very women who had been shaking the political tree so violently decided to down their protest tools and instead pick up the banner of patriotism. Yes, you heard that right. The suffragettes, renowned for their defiance, temporarily shelved their militant tactics to support the war effort. Now, this wasn't a case of sudden political amnesia or a collective nostalgia for corsets and curtsies. It was a strategic pivot, a masterstroke in the art of political chess. By aligning with a national cause, Emmeline aimed to prove something that should have been as clear as daylight: women were just as capable as men, not only in demanding rights, but in defending their country. The decision wasn't just about optics, it was about necessity. The war effort required all hands on deck, and women stepped into roles traditionally reserved for men, who were off fighting in the trenches. Suddenly, those delicate creatures who supposedly couldn't handle a vote were driving ambulances, working in munitions factories, and quite literally keeping the country running. Talk about a plot twist worthy of a Shakespearean drama. Let's dig into the economic brass tacks here. Britain, caught in the throes of industrialization and now war, needed a massive workforce. Women filled the void left by the men who had traded factory smocks for military uniforms. By 1918, nearly 1 million women were employed in munitions factories alone. These weren't just any jobs, they were critical roles in the war machine, pivotal to the country's survival. And let's not gloss over the economics. Women were paid less than men for doing the same jobs. Shocking, I know. But the sheer volume of work they handled was a testament to their capabilities, if not to the fairness of their wages. Public opinion began to shift like the tide. The same society that had once clutched its pearls at the thought of women voting was now begrudgingly acknowledging their competence. As women proved their mettle with every shell produced and every engine repaired, the question of suffrage began to look less like a radical demand and more like a logical next step. It was as if the nation collectively raised an eyebrow and, in a rare moment of clarity, thought, maybe these women are onto something. Emmeline Pankhurst, never one to let an opportunity slip by, seized this moment to pivot her focus. She urged women to show their patriotism, believing that such dedication would bolster their case for political equality post-war. It was a gamble, banking on the idea that the government would reward their wartime contribution with the vote. In some ways, it was the ultimate political play. Emmeline was betting on the idea that proving their worth in war would translate into recognition in peace. Yet, here's where the story takes another of its infamous turns. Despite the monumental effort women put into the war, their battle for recognition was far from over. When the war ended in 1918, the world didn't instantly transform into a utopia of gender equality. The Representation of the People Act 1918 did extend the vote to women, but with strings attached. Only women over 30 who met minimum property qualifications could vote. In contrast, men over 21 were given the vote indiscriminately. It was progress, sure, but it was like getting half a sandwich when you'd been promised a feast. The irony was palpable. Women had kept the fires of industry burning while the nation was at war, proving their capabilities beyond a shadow of a doubt. Yet, when it came time to reap the rewards of their labour, society was still stuck in its old ways, clutching on to outdated notions like a shipwrecked sailor to a piece of driftwood. It was as if the world had collectively decided to say, thanks for saving the day, but let's not get carried away with this whole equality thing. The war had reshaped not only the map of Europe, but the very fabric of British society. Traditional gender roles had been upended, if only temporarily, and women had demonstrated their ability to step into any role with competence and grace, or, when necessary, with a pair of grease-stained hands and a smudge of engine oil on their cheeks. The nation had seen what women could do when given the chance, and there was no going back to the old status quo without igniting a fresh wave of unrest. While the suffrage movement had paused its militant activities, the fight for equality was far from over. The war had provided a stage for women to showcase their capabilities, but the post-war world was still a battleground for equal rights. Emmeline and her fellow suffragettes understood that the war had changed the game, but the rules still needed rewriting. In the end, the war had proven to be a catalyst for change, albeit a reluctant one. The more things changed, the more they stayed frustratingly the same, with progress inching forward at a pace that would make a tortoise look like a sprinter. But Emmeline and the suffragettes were nothing if not persistent, and they had already shown they were in this for the long haul, ready to fight the next battle with the same unyielding determination that had brought them this far. And so, as the dust settled on the battlefields of Europe and the suffragettes prepared for the next chapter in their relentless quest for equality, the world stood on the brink of a new era. The war had shown that women were more than capable of handling the responsibilities of citizenship. Now it was up to the nation to catch up with that reality, even if it had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the modern age. Stay tuned, as history's next chapter promises to be as riveting as the last, with Emmeline and her comrades leading the charge toward a fairer world. The Representation of the People Act 1918 was like a slightly undercooked casserole, good in parts, but leaving a lot to be desired. Sure, it granted voting rights to around 84 million women over the age of 30, but the measure of progress was more like a tiptoe than a leap forward. The government had dipped its toes into the pool of gender equality, but there was a long swim ahead before anyone could call it a dive. Emmeline Pankhurst, however, was not one to rest on laurels, even if they were grudgingly granted. She understood that this was just the beginning. The world had been shown a glimpse of what women could achieve when given the chance, and Emmeline was determined to keep that door from swinging shut. The act was undeniably a landmark in British history, but it was a bit like being given a set of keys to a car with only half a tank of gas. The fight was far from over. Women under 30, who made up the bulk of the workforce and had contributed immensely during the war, were still left out in the cold, politically speaking. It was as if the nation had collectively decided that wisdom, or at least the right to vote, only came with age, a rather convenient belief for those in power. The suffragettes might have secured a victory, but it was a partial one, a signal that the battle for full equality had just taken a new form. The economic context of this period was crucial. Post-war Britain was a land of contrasts, a place where prosperity and poverty sat side by side at the societal dinner table. The war had strained the nation's coffers, and the economy was like a jigsaw puzzle with too many pieces missing. Women, who had proven their mettle in the workforce, were suddenly facing the prospect of unemployment as soldiers returned home. The irony was thicker than a foggy London morning. Women had kept the country afloat, and now they were being asked to step aside, as if their contributions were just a wartime novelty. But let's not get too pessimistic. The Representation of the People Act was a crack in the dam, and Emmeline Pankhurst was ready to widen it. She didn't just sit back and admire the view. She got right to work, focusing her formidable energy on the next goal, securing voting rights for all women on equal terms with men. This goal was finally achieved with the Equal Franchise Act of 1928, a decade after the 1918 Act, which granted suffrage to all women over the age of 21. Emmeline, however, would not live to see this triumph, as she passed away on June 14, 1928, just a few weeks before the Act became law. Yet her legacy was as enduring as her resolve, a testament to the power of persistence in the face of adversity. The myth of Emmeline Pankhurst as a towering figure of suffrage is well deserved, but let's not forget the reality she faced. Her life was a series of battles, each one fought with the tenacity of someone who knew the stakes were higher than just personal ambition. Emmeline was a master of strategy, a woman who understood that sometimes you have to play the long game to win the war. She recognized that the path to equality was not a straight line, but a winding road filled with obstacles, each one requiring a different approach. Emmeline's legacy is more than just a historical footnote. It's a living testament to the power of activism. Her story resonates with today's gender equality movements, which continue to fight against the tides of complacency and tradition. Emmeline's tactics, bold, audacious, and sometimes controversial, were the blueprint for modern activism, proving that sometimes you have to break a few windows to let the light in. Her life was a reminder that progress often comes not from the comfort of polite discourse, but from the discomfort of challenging the status quo. As we look back on Emmeline Pankhurst's life, it's tempting to romanticize her as a hero who single-handedly changed the course of history. And while she was undoubtedly a pivotal figure, the reality is that she was part of a larger movement, one that included countless women and men who fought alongside her. The suffrage movement was a tapestry of voices, each one contributing to the chorus that demanded change. Emmeline was the conductor, but the orchestra was vast and varied, each member playing a crucial role in the symphony of progress. In today's world, where gender equality is still a work in progress, Emmeline's story is as relevant as ever. The challenges she faced, inequality, discrimination, and societal norms, are echoes of the battle still being fought. Her legacy is a reminder that the fight for equality is ongoing, a marathon rather than a sprint. Emmeline's life was a testament to the idea that one person can make a difference, but it takes a movement to create lasting change. And so, as we wrap up this historical journey, let's take a moment to appreciate the indomitable spirit of Emmeline Pankhurst. She was a woman who refused to be silenced, who turned every setback into an opportunity, and who understood that true change is often born from the most unlikely of circumstances. Her legacy is one of resilience, courage, and the unwavering belief that a better world is possible if we are willing to fight for it. In the end, Emmeline Pankhurst didn't just demand a seat at the table, she built a new one, and she invited everyone to join her in shaping the future. Now that's a legacy worth celebrating.